Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is my show. I'm glad that you can join me on the show. Let me make sure the volume is correct. I hope you guys are doing all right this morning. It is an early morning. I guess it's always early morning. That's why it's a morning show. I call it the best damn morning show, covering news, politics, domestic, international, and everything in between, even sometimes issues of culture if those things bubble up. And I am glad that you guys can join me on this episode. We are on episode 145. We've done 145 of these. We've been together for 145 of these. Now, I know there's a lot of new people that have joined. Welcome to the family. There we are. Finicky mic. Yeah, finicky mic. It's straight. It's straight. It wasn't muted. The cord is iffy. I'm glad that you guys can join me on this episode of the show. We have a damn good show for you today. We have economic data that is out that we must talk about. And just so happen, an act of God, Professor Wolff will be on the show today, and we can discuss the economic data with Professor Wolff. I think the economic data on some level speaks for itself. But of course, Wolff is fantastic at elaborating on what economic data means, why the economic data is what it is, especially considering the president has decided to have a tariff war, trade war against the entirety of the world. And in having a trade war against the entirety of the world, there are consequences of that trade war. Those consequences definitively bad. This humble non-economist who's taken Econ 101 and can look at the world and understand the logic of why things are going to precede something else, has pointed out to you that Jerome Powell was downplaying what was going to take place regarding our economy. The reason I said he was downplaying it is because, let's be honest, Fed chairs are supposed to downplay it. The Fed chair, our economy functions on confidence, and the dollar is not undergirded by anything short of the military and confidence. And so you don't want the Fed chair coming out saying, oh my God, everything is on fire. He's not going to do that. What the Fed chair is going to do is be more muted. He's going to downplay, because what he doesn't want to do is freak people out when there's a market sell-off because the Fed chair said something that freaked people out. Me, I have no such issue. And if it becomes very clear that, okay, you're putting on tariffs, these tariffs are increasing prices, the increased prices that people are effectively paying and the weakening of the dollar means that people are paying more for what they were typically getting, and you're causing a recession. Increased prices and a recession equals stagflation. I said that like a month ago when Donald Trump initiated this trade war. And what do you know? What do you know? What do you know? Apparently, everybody else is catching up, because the numbers that came out show the economy shrank by 0.3%. The U.S. economy contracted by 0.3% in the quarter of 2025, the first negative reading since 2022, according to the initial measurement released on Wednesday by the Commerce Department. As bad as that number, as you think the number is, it's worse. Because in the fourth quarter, it was 2.4%. If you add those numbers together, that is a 2.7% contraction in the economy over the course of the 3 months, first quarter, 4 months, that Donald Trump has been in office. It wasn't an act of God. It was what Trump is doing in regards to policy. And if you look through the article, right here's another point. Economists were expecting the GDP to have grown 0.4% for the first 3 months of 2025, compared with an increase of 2.4% in the fourth quarter of 2024. So in 2024, 2.4%, now negative 0.3%. Add those numbers together, that's a 2.7% drop. 2.7% drop. Go further in the article. Many analysts are warning that the economy is now undergoing a slow motion swoon. That's the way to put it. A slow motion swoon. Who wrote that? Who is writing dry economic data and they come up with the term slow motion swoon? Okay, God bless them. Shipments in the West ports are plunging while prices increases are expected to begin eating into sales data and incomes as heightened uncertainty freezes investment. Quote, a period of stagflation now lies likely ahead if the current set of tariffs are maintained, with recession the most likely outcome, and additional reciprocal tariffs are imposed in full in July. Ian Shepherdson, chief economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics, said in a note on Wednesday. I love to be proven correct. I do indeed love to be proven correct. Again, not an economist, rational man, sitting on the moon, looking at events, and can add 1 + 1 and come to the conclusion that equals 2. It was obvious and it was inevitable in the way that Donald Trump went after this. Now, to be fair to Trump, I don't take issue with Trump's diagnosis. Meaning you're looking at the economy and you're saying, okay, our industrial base has suffered. We're getting all of these products in, people are losing jobs. We need to increase business, increase jobs. We need to bring those jobs back into the United States. Okay, that's a rational assessment that a person can come to. So I'm going to have a tariff war against the world because China has been taking advantage of us and we've been a whipping post. Okay, that is absurd. That is just ludicrous. Meaning, you can define a problem. Okay, I think that's 2 + 2. The answer is 356. No. Just no. You're getting it wrong. And because you're getting it wrong, everybody else is suffering for your incompetence. And of course, somebody who lies as easily as he breathes, as Donald Trump, is not going to accept that it's his fault. And so when Donald Trump is pressed on this, and before I even get to that, to show what this means to you, I love this clip. This is a clip by CNBC, who would typically, ostensibly, be on Donald Trump's side. Republican, tax cuts, more money in the pockets of the rich. Donald Trump's a billionaire. You would think they would love Donald Trump. Listen to what they say. Listen to what they say. Don't take my word for it. Take their word for it. When they try to put this in real world terms. Okay, I guess this is MSNBC. Oh, I'm sorry, MSNBC. But listen to them put this in real world terms.
I'm going to put up just a chart showing how past presidents have performed in their first 100 days, according to the stock market, the S&P 500 for the first 100 days. Joe Biden is at the top of this list, 8.5%. That's how well he did with the S&P 500 in his first 100 days. Look at Donald Trump, 2024 down there, negative 7.8%. He is ahead of only Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. How do I read that? How do you read that?
Yeah, let me put that in more directly human terms. Stocks have fallen 8% under Trump since Inauguration Day. The market cap of the S&P 500 is $52 trillion. Multiply one by the other, you get $4 trillion, divide by the number of households, and now it's going to get human. That's $33,000 per American household.
Wow.
So the cost to your 401k, to the average viewer out there, is one car. He's cost you one car in 100 days. Good luck for the next 3.5 years, I reckon.
One car in 100 days. Trillions of dollars just gone from the stock market in 100 days. Trillions of dollars just up in smoke. Up in smoke. I want to make this in more real terms. When Donald Trump is pressed on this, hey, you said that when Joe Biden was running the government and the stock market was under Joe Biden, that was his fault, that he was the one that was responsible for it. All right, great question. What is Trump and how is Trump going to answer this? I mean, this is a pretty damning question, right? My mouse is like freaking out. I don't know what's going on with my mouse. All right, I'm going to share this. This is Trump answering the question about.
Airlock Houston, we see you.
What do you have to say about it?
Transition, sir. You frequently took credit for the stock market highs.
Close the thermal cup.
You said it was a reflection of how well you were doing in the polls, and then after you were elected, you said the stock market highs were a reflection of how well the transition is going and the American people's confidence in your incoming administration. Now, the stock market's not doing so well, and you're saying that's the Biden stock market, yet you are the president. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I'm not taking a credit or discredit for the stock market. I'm just saying.
Transitions.
So Trump's take is, I'm not taking credit for the stock market. Just, okay, it's not me. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. You're standing there, jelly all over your face. Did you get the jelly? Did you take that out? No, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I know the chocolate is all over my fingers, but nope, I didn't do it. And when he had his meeting yesterday, he had to deal with people asking him about the economy. Hey, bro, the economy under you shrunk by 0.3%. What do you have to say about that? That's a big deal. That's a 2.7% contraction. They were expecting one thing. It came out to be completely different than what it was supposed to be. And again, it was 2.4% in the fourth quarter. In the first quarter, first 3 months, 0.3% contraction. Now, he wants to lie and say, well, the tariffs hadn't gone into effect. That's a lie. The tariffs did go into effect because if you remember, Donald Trump had to walk those back to 10%, meaning they had already gone into effect. And they're already in effect now on China. Listen to Donald Trump's response when pressed on, hey, this is your economy at this point. What do you have to say about the fact that the stock market, or not just even the stock market, the economy itself, the GDP, has taken a hit?
We took over on January 20th. These are quarterly reports. We took over on January 20th. The tariffs haven't kicked in yet. I know that, and I don't want this to happen, but I know that China is doing very poorly right now. I just saw some reports coming out, and I don't want that to happen. We took over on January 20th. These are quarterly reports. We took over on January 20th. The tariffs haven't kicked in yet. I know that, and I don't want this to happen, but I know that China is doing very poorly right now. I just saw some reports coming out, and I don't want that to happen to China. I like the president a lot, President Xi. I don't want it to happen. I was actually saddened to hear it, but they are getting absolutely hammered in China. And, they're sending boats, the biggest boats in the world, carrying cargo like nobody's ever seen before. These are the biggest boats in the world, biggest cargo ships in the world. And they're coming and they're turning around in the Pacific Ocean. They're doing a big U-turn and going back because they don't want the goods because 145% tariff. But at a certain point, I hope we're going to make a deal with China. We're talking to China, but their factories are closing all over China because we're not taking their product. We don't want their product unless they're going to be fair with us. And
now, just to be clear, all of these are lies. All of these are lies. The notion that factories are closing in China, nope. The notion that Donald Trump is talking to China, nope. None of those things are true. Boats, empty cargo, yes, and that's not even true. Ironically, in all of this, is that imports into the U.S. went up. And it went up because people went on a buying spree in order to try to avoid the tariffs. So, yeah, there might have been empty cargo ships. Fair enough. Factories are not closing in China. China's not budging. The economy is what it is what it is. And if you notice, he meandered from the 0.3% as if what you are doing to China somehow makes the number that we're getting okay. It doesn't. Meaning, this is a fight you engaged in. This is not a fight that the American public wanted. And to make that point even clear, the fact that the American public voted for Trump mainly on the issue of the economy, and now when they're looking at the economy, they're like, this is horrendous. He's doing a horrible job. This sucks. gets across a change from where they were when they elected him and what they elected him on versus where they are now and their perspective of him on that very same issue. It is a radical decline. And I'm pointing out, it doesn't matter what is happening to China. It matters what is happening to the American public, considering you are the one that initiated all of it. You did this. I don't care what happens in China. I care what happens here. I live here. So you did this. So this meandering in the conversation, well, I mean, the numbers, they're China, but China. Factories are closing in China. Xi Jinping, he's a great guy. He's a really great guy. But, this is a bullshit artist trying to bullshit and failing at it miserably. That's what that is. That's what this is. A bullshit artist trying to bullshit his way out of his own failure. That's what it is. No more, no less. It's on him. It has nothing to do with China. And to make the point even clearer about China, oligarchs in this country made the choice to say, hey, I can shut this factory down. I can ship it over to China, and I can pay wages much, much, much less in China. And yes, Bob, Tyrone, Paco, I don't know, Shirley, all of you have lost your jobs. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. You can work a service job. You can drive Uber. I'm sorry about that. But I need to make buck. I need to buy another house. I need to buy another boat. I need to buy, another resort at Martha's Vineyard. I need these things. If I don't have those things, I'm going to jump off of a roof. So I'm sorry you had to lose your $15 job. I need to make bank. And they did this for 50 years, year after year after year. And they would take the money and they would pocket the money, or they would take that money, they would buy back stock, or they would take that money and they would put it into a political campaign to ensure that the tariffs, when that stuff is coming back into the country, is as low as possible, or for that matter, to get political favors where they can get kickbacks in regards to tax breaks. That's what they did. China didn't do that. They decided, we're going to build railroads, we're going to build high-speed rail, we're going to build buildings, we're going to invest in drones, science, we're going to invest in people, college, science, etc. That's the difference. Don't blame China for something that your own system not just allowed, but propagated and encouraged. Blame your oligarchs, blame your system that did it. China had nothing to do with it. Have they advantaged themselves? Yes. Just like your oligarchs advantaged themselves off of it, or just like your political figures advantaged themselves with the money that they were effectively getting from these plutocrats in this country. China had nothing to do with it. I don't care what your trade war has to do with China. I care about what it does in the United States. I'm going to let him finish. I'm just pointing it out. He's lying to you. He's lying to you, just like he was lying to you in the interview yesterday.
Includes intellectual property and other things. There are a lot of things far beyond just buy, sell. So we'll see what happens. But, I was not, because somebody said, well, were you happy? I said, I am not happy. I want China to do well. I want every country to do well.
As I said, a bullshitter, bullshitting his way through a press conference. Fantastic question, pointing out, hey, this trade war is not doing well for us. People lost trillions of dollars. Their 401ks have taken a massive hit. And now we've seen GDP drop, which means layoffs. I want to keep this going because the brain dead, incompetent people in his administration are trying to spin yarn into gold and saying some of the weirdest, dumbest things that people could say. This is Navarro, the one that got into a fight with Elon Musk. Listen to what he says here about, as I keep pointing out, a 2.7% contraction in the economy.
I got to say just one thing about today's news. That's the best negative print I have ever seen in my life. And the markets need to look beneath the surface of that. We had a 22% increase in domestic investment. That is off the charts when you strip out inventories and the negative effects of the surge in imports because of the tariffs. You had 3% growth. So we really like where we're at.
Hey, if you take out all of the bad stuff We did fantastic. If you remove all of the bad stuff that's in it, we did great. If you take out this, if you take out this, if you take out this, if you take out that, if you get rid of that, this economy is awesome. This is nonsense. Nobody told Trump to have a trade war. Nobody voted for a trade war. Nobody expected a trade war. Trump himself did this. Again, if I give him the benefit of the doubt, him looking at an issue and saying, this is a problem that needs to be dealt with, fine. On some level, that's why people voted for him. But to come to an assessment that you're going to roll back 50 years of globalization that the United States itself kicked off, and you're going to do it in one man in a country with 5% of the world, and you are going to effectively attack the world and come up with this nonsense stab in the back myth of the America as a whipping post. Everybody's taking advantage of us. And so we need to have this muscular economic policy in order to bend the world to our whims where we can take advantage of the rest of the world. Not so much. Not so much. It's outrageous. It's insane. And yet it is what Donald Trump is trying to do. And all of this talk about him talking to China is nonsense. Nonsense. So this Brett Baer doing good work, actually. U.S. Trade Representative is having a conversation with Brett Baer. I want you to hear what the U.S. Trade Representative says about this notion of talking to China, because he kind of let the cat out of the bag, something that all of us knew Trump was lying about. Anyway, this is Brett Baer. Credit to Brett Baer for this.
Leaders level with the president, the prime minister, but we stand ready to engage.
Last thing, for the people who look at this policy and say this is designed to put pressure on China, it's all designed to kind of put the squeeze on China. Is that a fair assessment? Are you trying to get China to the in a weakened negotiating state because that's the biggest adversary?
I think that's a very Washington thing to think.
Look at it.
I think it is. But, for me, we're worried about the United States of America. We have this giant trade deficit. We have offshore manufacturing. Our ag exports are way down. It's affecting normal people in the country. We want them to have jobs. We want them to have opportunities. Obviously, China is a huge part of this, and we want to make sure that we have fair trade with China.
And they're not official talks yet, right?
Not yet. Not yet.
So no talks. No, not yet. No conversations with China. No. And China backs us up because the foreign minister, Wang Yi, has also pointed out there are no talks between the United States and China. And China would not pick up the phone to call Donald Trump. He's going to be waiting for a very long time for that phone call, because from their point of view, the 5,000 years will come to an end before we make a phone call to Donald Trump. That's where they are. The other big story is this. Right here. I'll just play the clip and you can see it for yourself. I will say, from this point on, this is Donald Trump's war. Donald Trump can't keep saying this is Joe Biden's war. This is Donald Trump's war.
Thanks to President Trump's tireless efforts to secure a lasting peace, I am glad to announce the signing of today's historic economic partnership agreement between the United States and Ukraine, establishing the United States-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. This partnership allows the United States to invest alongside Ukraine to unlock Ukraine's growth assets, mobilize American talent, capital, and governance standards that will improve Ukraine's investment climate and accelerate Ukraine's economic recovery. The Development Finance Corporation will participate and help to establish this fund in collaboration with the government of Ukraine. Today's agreement signals clearly to Russian leadership that the Trump administration is committed to a peace process centered on a free, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine over the long term. It's time for this cruel and senseless war to end. The killing must stop, and both the United States and the government of Ukraine look forward to quickly operationalizing this historic economic partnership for both the Ukrainian and American people.
A few points. One, you can't operationalize anything while the war goes on. So there's that. Two, every syllable, every word that comes out of my mouth, Ukraine is shrinking, meaning they're losing more and more territory day by day by day. In a month, it will be that much more. In 2 months, it will be that much more. And the deal that Donald Trump is effectively sending to Putin is dead on arrival. Russia was very clear about their terms. A, we would agree to a ceasefire, provided you're not providing intelligence, providing you're not providing weapons, providing Europe is not providing weapons and intelligence, providing Ukraine is not raising their military. Meaning, if it freezes, it freezes. None of this nonsense of, well, let's just have a unilateral or let's have a unconditional ceasefire. Nope. We've done that. Minsk agreements 1 and 2, if you remember, was used as a way of building up a massive Ukrainian military that was the largest military in Europe. And the reality of it is, a deal that was supposed to end a conflict and prevent a conflict ended up being used as a platform to provoke a war. So the notion that Russia is going to say, hey, sure, because the losing side asks us, totally, we'll have an unconditional ceasefire. And they would reorganize their military. They would bring in handicapped people and women and the rest of the manpower that they can muster from the country, grabbing people off the streets, what they call it, bussification, as they were calling it in Ukraine in the Rada. And they would once again go into this fool's errand of resuming the war. He must think Russia are full of idiots. What is this? What is this? What is this? What is going on? Okay, there we are. He must think Russia are idiots. They're not. They've done this. They won't be doing it again. And so unless you give them a deal that makes sense, that is enforceable, that falls within the context of their red lines, then you get nothing. When Witkoff went to Russia, the article came out pointing out in Bloomberg that Putin didn't budge. Hey, our red lines are red lines for a reason. Meaning the ceasefire thing, hey, that sounds great. We're not negotiating, though, in this kind of weird, haphazard way. We want to sit down and deal with the actual cause of the war. That's what we want. No more, no less. And no, we're not stopping our military advancement as we have this conversation and as we have these peace talks. We are willing to talk to Zelensky unconditionally. We're willing to have that, even though we think he's illegitimate. We'll do that. But we're not stopping our forward momentum on the battlefield. That's not happening. That is not going to happen. That's not going to work. That's not what we're going to do. You're going to acknowledge these territories as being ours. And if we keep going, there will be Sumy also, where we will have a referendum, and Sumy will join the Russian Federation, and we will put that in our constitution, and there again will be another location that will be part of ours. Meaning, you can keep playing around all you want. The reality of it is only going to get worse for you. You are losing on the battlefield. We know you're losing on the battlefield. And we wouldn't even be having this conversation about ceasefire if you were winning on the battlefield. Do you honestly believe that a person like Donald Trump, who tries to take advantage in every situation, if he was given a winning hand in Ukraine, that he wouldn't push for very similar demands from the standpoint of Russia in order to get them to capitulate, or at the very least to get a ceasefire or a deal? Of course he would. This is the same man that is trying to effectively have a tariff war against the world and is now in a tariff war against China. He would push if he had the cards to do so. But as Trump said so eloquently, he doesn't have the cards. So when Russia is presenting their demands, trying to get across them, the loser doesn't get to dictate terms. Well, he believes that he is the president of the US, and because he's the president of the US, that everybody else is going to bow to him. And it doesn't work that way when you have lost a war. And he can try to say this is Biden's war all he wants. This is the United States war. Trump is the president of the United States, the country that provoked that war, that spent hundreds of billions of dollars into that war, killing Russians, and is now tail between legs trying to come up with some kind of quote unquote ceasefire. Not so much. Not so much. Now, if you are willing to acknowledge those territories, if you are willing to ensure that the Russian speakers that are in Ukraine are not going to be attacked by the government of that country, hell, they may even go into the notion of denazification, especially if they continue to press. And by the way, there may be a point, a pressure point, where they say, okay, we'll give you what you want. Apparently, they just haven't got there yet. Now, the catch becomes, is Ukraine going to accept it? Also, what's interesting is what are the ramifications of this deal? Truth be told, Trump did not exactly get what he wanted, but neither did Zelensky. This notion that they're going to pay back $350 billion, that's off the table. They pay going forward. So if Trump gives them weapons now, then that goes into a queue where they get the money back. By the same token, there are no security guarantees associated with this. And not just no security guarantees associated with it, it's not even implicit security guarantees. They're acting as if by virtue of the deal that the U.S. has a stake, and because the U.S. has a stake, that they would somehow defend Ukraine. No, no, Trump is not getting into a nuclear war over Ukraine, at the very least, not up to this point. And so this deal may go into perpetuity, in which case the U.S. may get some money off of it. But keep in mind, in order to get what they want, let's say rare earth minerals, oil, gas, I don't know, whatever other thing, resources that they have, it may take decades. And so there may not be a return on investment for decades with a deal like this. So I'm going to talk to this with Caleb Maupin later on in the show. But one last point before I go to my guests. This. Trump, for the first time in his administration, has authorized Congress $50 million in defensive articles. Now, the catch becomes, what does that mean? What does defensive articles mean? I don't know. Also, 50 million, considering the 200 billion that we've already dropped in Ukraine, seems like a drop in a bucket of all things. I'm not sure how many weapon systems you can get for $50 million. In either case, he released $50 million in funding for defensive articles for Ukraine. This is Trump's war. Biden might have pushed it. Biden might have been a radical whack job with it, but Donald Trump has taken it over. He could have just walked. He didn't take Steve Bannon's advice to walk the F away. He decided to dig in, and now he is ensconced in a deal, mineral deal with Ukraine in perpetuity. I want to bring in my guests. I'm joined with Andrii Telizhenko. He is a Ukrainian whistleblower, diplomat, former diplomat, and a good friend of the show. Andrii, man, how you doing? You doing all right?
Good morning, Jamal. Doing perfectly fine. I hope everybody else is also well. And a lot of developments, as always.
A lot of developments. And I guess there are two things. The mineral deal is the first thing that comes to mind. The RADA still needs to approve this. Is the RADA going to approve this deal?
Of course, like Zelensky has the majority in the parliament. Like he controls everybody with threats and prosecutions. So there's no opposition in the parliament. Basically, they're all owned by not just Zelensky, but the West. Mm-hmm. So it might go through pretty well. It might go not well because if the British and the Europeans would want to pull out people like Poroshenko, who they also control in the parliament, and have them try to push a political narrative. So, but overall, the parliament is owned by Zelensky. They will do whatever it takes to go and support his actions, illegal actions in Ukraine, selling off Ukraine to the West, making it become a more colony than it already is. And there's no people to fight, so now they're going to give away Ukrainian territory, minerals, and etc. For a war Ukraine has already lost. So this is what Zelensky's Ukraine is today, and I totally agree on what you're talking about here. This is just going forward with an escalation process, which everybody thought could have been stopped and could have not been proceeded. But I think things will not be as they seem right now. Hopefully, that there's going to be another track to work things out. Because for the United States right now, the main thing is to save their face for the Trump administration to show that they can get something out of Ukraine with the money they invested in from the Biden administration into the Kiev regime, which sold out, gave away that money, put into the pockets, laundered that money, and was basically used for monetization of the Zelensky and the Biden regime. So that this is one idea. The other idea is deals are written. Nobody saw that deal. What is it in it? I'd want to, because there's only things in the press that we're talking about, but nobody showed a copy of that deal to the Ukrainian population. Like there's a copy running around right now in the telegram from some members of parliament, but that's like just draft. Nobody showed like a copy with the signature. What did Ukraine give away? What did Zelensky give away for to continue to fight this war, to get more money from America or get at least to buy weapons from America? What did he sell off from Ukraine? Nobody saw that, and also the American population never saw what did the U.S. get. Nobody saw a signed copy, which is interesting for me to, as a citizen of my country and a U.S. citizen, to also find out what did their government sign and get a signed copy written to show what is the deal in there, what is it to gain.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, from my understanding, this goes into perpetuity. It's for things going forward, not backwards, meaning the whole $350 billion that Donald Trump was talking about, that's not the case. Effectively, anything that is purchased now can be purchased basically on credit, with the notion that the deal will pay it back when money is coming back in from the deal. The rub is, though, that if it goes into perpetuity, if this thing goes for, let's say, 50 years, that could equal up to $500 billion if indeed they can pull money out of Ukraine in the way that they're talking about pulling money out of Ukraine. So I guess from Donald Trump's point of view, whether I get 350 billion, at some point we'll get it. Just because we made the deal, we get 50-50 out of anything that we put into it. Also, it's not just a mineral deal. Like they keep using this term mineral deal in this kind of very propagandistic way. Oil, gas, pretty much anything you can pull out of the ground, it's the minerals, pretty much anything, right? Just Ukraine's natural resources.
And not just resources, but also infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and nuclear stations, etc. So, like, I just want to add, for U.S., it's a win, right? Like, anyway, it's a win-win situation, one way or another. They're going to get something out of it. It's not Afghanistan that how Biden pulled out and invested $2 trillion and left tons of weapons in there. And the Taliban is much better equipped than the Kiev regime today. So basically, that was the result. But for Ukraine and for Ukrainians, it's an understanding. What did Ukraine get? Nothing. There's no win for Ukraine. It's a lose for Ukraine, one way or another. Even if it goes under Moscow, this deal will, if it will stay in the fact with Russia. Like I'm saying, not in Moscow. Like physically, totally, Russia will. Ukraine be part of Russia, even though who knows, some things might happen. But like Ukraine, as whatever is left of Ukraine, will be under the Moscow umbrella, which Ukraine was for years and years before, and it was actually gaining much more than losing in the last 30 years. Ukraine lost in the last 30 years, everything was gained under Soviet Union. All the factories, everything they got, the people, territories, now it's lost. So if that even happens, the deal still may work for the United States. They might have investments in Ukraine, and they might work, and I think Russia's ready to work with that. But the problem is Ukrainians itself. This deal is not a deal. It's a destruction and a colonization of Ukraine more and more, just to continue the war. Just to continue a war for another month, 2 months, because Ukraine wants what Zelensky wants, and Trump allowed Zelensky to buy weapons, $15 million and over, or military articles, whatever he calls them. And that's anti-aircraft missile systems, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of stuff. And Ukraine is willing to buy it, even though it doesn't have the money to buy it. It's going to get loans from the West to buy that equipment and then continue this war with basically without not being able to pay out those loans to the World Bank. They're not going to get it from the United States. Trump said directly, U.S. is not going to give money to Ukraine to continue this war, but Ukraine can buy stuff. So this is what it's going to be up to. Ukraine is going to totally put itself in a ditch more and more with getting more and more loans, which it cannot pay out to the World Bank. And the U.S. won't care about it, of course. That's how it is. But for Trump, it's a win situation because it's not Afghanistan anymore for him. He already, if he exits Ukraine, he has a deal on the table. Even if it's going to take 50 years, if he's going to get stuff back, I think he's going to give it less. He's going to get things back if he makes a deal with Russia on a peace deal. And U.S. leaves Ukraine, I think U.S. can make more money together with Russia, trillions of dollars with the Arctic, with investments in Russia, investments in Ukraine, if it actually goes on peace, not continues this war. So Trump needs to not just think about the situation with Ukraine that he already won, but he has to think more broader that he can make a better deal if he goes out of Ukraine and U.S. leaves Ukraine totally, not just continues this war.
There's something else with this. The Brits, because the UK had already signed like a 30-year deal with Ukraine for mineral rights also. And there's something in this apparently that where it says it doesn't conflict. Like one doesn't conflict with the other, which I don't quite fully get how they couldn't conflict with the other. But that was the other thing that came up, that the British had already signed a deal with Ukraine also for mineral rights. Some people call it a secret deal, but it was outed at some point. I don't know how these two work together, to be honest. I mean, I know this is everything going forward. So old businesses, state businesses, those things are shielded. They're not included. But any new venture, any new exploration, even if there has to be a huge amount of investment, 50% of it effectively comes back to the US, 50 goes to Ukraine. Ukraine keeps control of what they go after. Like, I know the details of this have to be worked out. This is kind of like a framework. This is not necessarily the ironed out version of it. But yeah, I get the sense that he's selling off Ukraine. And he's selling off Ukraine without necessarily getting buy-in from the Ukrainian public just to proceed with a war that the majority of Ukraine doesn't even want to continue.
Yeah, this is what it is. And plus, within the framework of those so-called deals, if some situation that overlaps the law of Ukraine and the constitution of Ukraine, the deal has more power than the law and the constitution of Ukraine. So basically, we're spitting on the law of Ukraine. That's what it is all about. And Zelensky is reselling Ukraine like I don't know. I don't want to call it, but it's like this is prostitution.
If you want to say rape, that's the term you want to.
Yeah, yes, that's what it is, and he's selling it to anybody who is ready to come in and take it. And this is very unfortunate. And as I said, the only one who's going to suffer from this is Ukrainians. U.S. needs to get its act together. Trump administration promised peace. Peace, from my view, needs to come from this administration getting an executive order, whatever it takes, for Trump to sign off to get all the intel agencies, the CIA, the NSA, the counter intel, the military intelligence out of Ukraine, because those are the people who are sabotaging and will sabotage these peace negotiations, whatever deal he makes, whatever he signs. And because they're the ones who were there before the war, they're the ones who are interested in this war because they started this war. They're the ones who were ready and eager to use Ukrainians to fight Russians before they even ever started 10 years ago in Donbass with the coup and everything else, and then this war and special operations and this war happening today in Ukrainian soil. These people need to get out of Ukraine. The U.S. needs to show that they can move forward on this, and even for Trump himself, he needs to understand if he signs such an executive order or whatever he needs to sign legally to get them out of Ukraine, and they don't comply, and they still will sabotage behind his back, then he will understand who's behind this war. He will understand himself that it's not Russia behind this war, it's the deep state, the swamp, the people who are in the US who are trying to destroy him, are trying to sabotage his deals and kill Ukrainian lives and Russian lives on Ukrainian soil, and are backing Zelensky's regime against Trump. So they're collaborating against, and it will show up, and we will see it happen. He just needs to make this move. And he needs to understand that this is the move. One simple step, simple order that will show the truth in all the situation. And if they leave with complying with this, and they leave Ukraine, Zelensky will not have protection. He will not have any support from the US intel. The British are there, yes, the French are there, but they are still working with the US. All are being backed by the US, the Europeans, the NATO. Without the US, there's no NATO. Without the US, there's no MI6. They're all coordinated by the umbrella of the nuclear warheads of the United States of America. So these guys leave. Zelensky regime topples. You're going to have an interim government. Yeah, they'll go. You're going to have all these Nazi groups running around, but then without coordination from the Secret Service of Ukraine and the CIA, those Nazi groups will also fall apart, and it'll be easier to catch them and destroy them. So we'll have a step forward to normalizing Ukraine. You can engage your minerals deals or whatever deal you want, invest in Ukraine, make money, but you at least make a step forward for peace, and you will show the world that you're ready to do it. That's my strategy for the Trump administration. If they want to show a move forward, and this would be a great move forward for everybody. It's going to show Russia, it's going to show Ukrainians, and it's going to leave give Ukraine more sovereignty with negotiating with Russia, because they're going to have this MI6 or the CIA backing Zelensky to continue to fight this war, because they're the ones who are backing this war and sabotaging Trump. And they're going to sabotage this peace deal, peace negotiations, minerals deal, whatever, just because they're going to lose money on this. And these guys cannot lose, because that's what they are. They're the deep state. They're the state within the United States who are trying to undermine the president and the votes of the people in the United States.
Let me ask you this. Could Zelensky sign a peace deal? I mean, like, would he even be able to? Look, recently, a military commander on TV, no less, I think he said he was part of the 141st Division or something, but effectively said, it insinuated that they would march on Kiev if Zelensky either gave up territory, signed a deal, or even acknowledged territory as being part of Russia. Is that true? Is that the case? I mean, is it really to that extent where the president is in fear for his life?
Look, he's in fear for his life because he destroyed the country. He put 1 million people into the ground. That's what he's afraid of his life. These guys, the so-called brigaders, the neo-Nazis, some of the radical military crowd, they're all being coordinated by the Security Service of Ukraine. I was in the government before. We oversaw the law enforcement and the intel groups in Ukraine. I had files on these neo-Nazis in my hands, so I read they all are under the Secret Service of Ukraine, bribed, given money, given protection, given support, given coordination, whatever. And then they're being used for taking over businesses in Ukraine, for the Security Service of Ukraine. Like these guys are owned by the law enforcement, right? It's like the mafia, where you have people owned by them and they work together with the law enforcement. So this is the same thing here, but these guys are totally made up from the law enforcement and the intel groups, and then coordinated by the CIA. So Zelensky is playing the game that he might be afraid. So the problem with Zelensky, he's an illegal president by Article 110 Constitution of Ukraine as of May 20th of last year. So if he signs something, they can be groups in Ukraine which can come out and use this against this peace deal. The Zelensky signs one that says, "Oh, he's not a legitimate president," and they might push it through, and the CIA and the deep state might use it against it and try to continue this war. So for now, Zelensky, he cannot sign a peace deal if he would wanted to, but he doesn't want to, because for him it's a dead end. So anybody who's going to be after Zelensky, when Zelensky needs to leave Ukraine, that's why The CIA needs to move out of Ukraine, and the military intelligence of the U.S. needs to move out of Ukraine. He needs to lose his protection, so he has to leave. He needs to understand that he would leave. Yeah, there's going to be radical groups that are going to be put down, and there has to be interim government coordinated by Moscow and Washington, or agreed upon by Moscow and Washington, that's going to come in, prepare the ground for new elections, sign a peace deal, because they're going to be, by the Constitution, they can be legit. As I said, we talk about Telizhenko, somebody coming into the speaker's role and being basically a legitimate leader, as it was after the coup in 2013-14. This already happened in Ukraine. The president of Ukraine, Yanukovych, was pushed to flee Ukraine by the Nazi groups. That's why this whole idea of the president is afraid of the Nazi groups is because of Yanukovych, because he fled them. But Yanukovych never worked with the Americans. He was never with the United States. Zelensky is under the United States, and the Nazi groups are under the United States. So they are all in one team. So it's a big game show. Oh, these guys are trying to threaten me. No. Yeah, they're going to threaten him. They're going to try to kill him if there's going to be an order from the outside of Kiev. But we already had an interim government after the coup in 2013-14. And the Speaker of the Parliament was acting president for like 5 months or something. And that's when I worked in the cabinet of ministers as advisor to the first deputy prime minister. So we had this, and then he prepared elections, and those elections happened, and that is it. So why not do it again today? It's a legitimate process. And this acting president, the Speaker of the Parliament, who could be agreed upon by the United States and Russia, can sign a peace deal, which would calm everything down, and then basically the new president, elected president, can again support this peace deal with his signature again to add more even value to it, and have Ukraine say, yes, we twice agreed upon a peace. And this is going to be a path for getting Ukraine out of this ditch, if somebody would want to do that. But I don't know if somebody wants to do it right now. I know that Trump wants to do it, but there's a lot of people around him and a lot of lobby from the military industrial complex that don't want him to do it. Like, we have people trying to push this war around him. I know that Trump, Tucker Carlson, his family wants peace. They hate Zelensky, but he's listening to his advisors, as he did before, to people like Pompeo, to Mike Pence, who then threw him under the bus when Trump needed their support the most. And then they sanctioned people like me who came out against the Biden crime family because they were not supporting Trump. They were working against him for the deep state. I mean, now we saw where Pompeo is, working for the Soros groups in Ukraine. So these people, they're everywhere. You have to clean house all the time. You should mention them. You should not be afraid to talk about who these people are.
Okay, under that logic, though, couldn't the next president say Zelensky was illegitimate, and so that mineral deal is also illegitimate? Meaning, can't they cancel the mineral deal under the same model, under the same idea?
They can, but it's signed by the cabinet of ministers, as I believe. So it's basically the cabinet of ministers is the people who are there. They're voted in by the parliament of Ukraine. So that's why Zelensky did not sign it. It was signed specifically upon with the cabinet of ministers, basically the government of Ukraine, which is still legit, if you can say it. Yeah. That said, Zelensky is not legit, and anything he does as of May 20th last year is not legit. But the government and the parliament has still the capacity to run the country one way or another.
Wow.
But you can, of course, you can come in and say, look, the previous government, if the United States is not going to bring peace to Ukraine, and one day people will come, Ukraine will gain its peace, Ukraine will be freed from the Nazis, and there will be a government, and the United States will try to push this war until the end. There's going to be more and more people dying, more destructions in Ukraine, but there will be one day a government that will come back to Ukraine and say, look, we got our peace, we got our country back, we fought for our country, but the United States didn't do a damn thing. Why should we acknowledge what was done before by the previous government? If you're not going to acknowledge us as a country, you're not going to acknowledge our new government, you're not going to acknowledge what we're going to do right now, you're not going to acknowledge our new territories, which are free, and Russia freed them, Why should we work with you, and why should we acknowledge all the deals that were made before? And even the loans that were given to Ukraine, we don't know who you gave it to a bunch of Nazis. We're not Nazis, and that the previous government is not legitimate at all, and that can be done also. So it depends on what the U.S. today would want how their actions are going to do, because their actions are also going to reflect on what the future of Ukraine might look like, and what the future government will they want to work with the West, or will they want to also not just sabotage, but put things into a pause and say, look, guys, you did this to our country. You were involved in this. You could have stopped it. You didn't. We're not gonna work with you anymore. Let's rethink what we signed for the last 30 years, and then we're gonna see if we're gonna work it together or not. So this may also happen. This is going to be Ukraine is going to still a pretty big chunk of territory left, and that's going to be a big question. Everybody's going to say, "Oh, we're going to go under Beijing and Moscow totally, and we will not want to work with you at all." So I think that'd be a big spit in the face of the West and say, "You're totally lost. You lost in this war, and we're going to tell you, and we're not going to work with you at all." So that would be also a big option if Ukraine is going to be led this path. But I hope this not going to happen, because it's going to be a bad situation for everybody, and we can still make good peace happen today.
Well, I mean, I don't know what's in Trump's mind. I know the deals that he's been sending to Russia have been non-starters. I don't know the flexibility that he's giving Witkoff in order to make those agreements. And so a lot of this depends on him. I mean, his ability to influence the European Union, whether or not Zelensky would even accept, that's a big question mark. Zelensky has been going rogue. He said he's not accepting Crimea, he's not accepting anything. Now, Kellogg went on Fox News and said, well, Ukraine has been open to accepting, I think he said 22 different demands. Okay, he's saying that, but these are the same people who are like, Russia's willing to freeze the conflict. Okay, no, they're not. Zelensky is willing to give up Crimea. Okay, no, he's not. Like, these were things that they were saying that reality was different. So
yeah, sorry.
Is that me? That's me? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why that started. I'm sorry. But please continue with that. So, yeah, please continue with that. Please carry that.
Yeah, so look, for what Trump, unfortunately, and his team don't know how to deal with Russia. This is not some small country's conflict that you can come in and say, push in one country and push another, and they're going to make a deal, and that's it. This is not Palestine and Israel war. This is Russia, the largest nuclear country in the world, the largest country in the world, one of the largest military powers in the world, and a strong economic country today also. And you cannot just tell them what to do. So you have to have a plan. I don't believe there is one, a strategy. I understood that before, even before Trump won, that they're going to try to push Russia a couple of times until they will not be able to, and they will have to agree upon the deal that's going to be on the table. But the problem is, the longer the U.S. continues in this war, even with the signed minerals so-called deal in Ukraine, that they already gained something out of it, the harder they fall at the end, because they already lost. The West lost. They couldn't topple Russia in the first 3-4 months of the war. That was the main idea of this war. They couldn't do that. They couldn't topple Russia. They lost already. So they're continuing this war, just whatever its sake it is. There's no win strategy in this situation for Ukraine at all. Ukraine has lost completely. The West has lost also. So, but at least they can win by not giving a bigger fall at the end. So they have to come out and understand they have to leave Ukraine now. Like, just, you got your deals, leave it now, get an interim government agreed upon by both sides, and move from there. Get out the intel groups out of Ukraine, the CIA, the military intelligence in the United States, and then move from there. That's simple steps, and that's what everybody would agree upon. I know there's agreements going on with Russia on different topics right now, separate from Ukraine.
Yeah.
But Trump is trying to intercombine those things. I think not Trump, but his team, who are trying to undermine his idea of a peace situation with Ukraine, trying to make it more complex. If it's going into a more complex situation, you have to just stop it and rule out everything that the complex stuff, and put out the simple stuff first, and then the hard stuff separate, and then see what you can intercombine and what you can do first. It's simple things. Just put it on a blackboard and do stuff. They're trying to sabotage Trump even from within. Zelensky is like Al Qaeda. He went rogue on the United States, like Osama bin Laden. He was made by the CIA. He was formed by the CIA, the MI6, but now he went rogue because he understands he has the power to do it, and he can buy lobbyists. He can control the government of the United States. He's waiting for elections in Congress next year. That's why they're pushing this. So Trump will lose more support from the people around him. That's what he's been told by the same CIA advisors who should be working for the president of the United States. They're telling Zelensky to wait. The president's going to lose power soon. The elections in Congress, look what he's trying to do. There's a lot of problems in the United States. People give the support, but everybody understands after big support, the support might come down a bit, and then you're going to lose some elections. So this might lead to losing seats in Congress, and then Zelensky will try to have lobbyists push through Congress the support of Ukraine, just to undermine Trump, to impeach Trump, and etc. And this is being done by the same people that should work for the president of the United States. This is the biggest problem. It's a big problem for Trump. He needs to clean house. Why didn't he clean house in Kiev with the embassy, the U.S. embassy in Kiev? Again, why didn't he clean house with the CIA in Ukraine? Again, he doesn't do that. Why? Because he's being told not to do that. Everybody who tells him not to do that, they're the traitors. He should have listened to Bannon. He should listen to Tucker Carlson. And these people could tell him. And I think Woodcock is a great negotiator. I think he understands the situation. You should have Tucker Carlson and Woodcock negotiate the situation. I think they'd make it a much faster deal than everybody, all from the deep state and all those swamp officials who are trying to just bleed the United States with this war.
Are you optimistic that this is going to be resolved? I had a long conversation with Ted Raw, as another guest on the show. He was far more optimistic than I was on this. You were Ukrainian. You were there when all of this stuff had started. Like you say, you became a whistleblower after the fact when you realized, oh my God, this is what this has turned out to be. Are you optimistic that this is going to resolve?
If Trump gets his act together, yes, he can do it faster. Not fast, but faster. I understand there's a lot of, he's not God. Russia is ready to negotiate. Just promise there are facts that the United States needs to understand. They cannot just leave Ukraine as it is today with the Nazis and the terrorists sitting in the government. Why I'm saying already terrorists, because I said these people are already threatening to bomb civil parades in Russia during the memorial of the Victory Day parade. The president, the so-called president, legitimate President Zelensky, is saying that publicly, and his minions around him are doing the same thing. So this is a terrorist Nazi state. You cannot leave Ukraine like this. So if he does, Ukraine is going to be the next Somalia right in the heart of Europe. Who is that going to be interested into doing that? It's going to be only the deep state, because I think the United States, yes, it's far away, but they're not going to be interested in having Ukraine left like this, right in the heart of Europe. Only the deep state can do that, because they're going to be interested in money laundering schemes, which are going to use Ukraine. They're going to use Ukraine for human trafficking, organ trafficking. They need a rogue country like that right there, but not state officials, and I think Trump doesn't want that also. So if he agrees upon it and understands there's simple things that need to be done, yes, there's prospects, and I believe that Trump can do it. If he will be undermined like he was in the first time with people who sabotaged his actions, it might lead to another bloodshed, and the U.S. is just going to get a hard fall, and Russia, one way or another, will free Ukraine from the Nazis. It's going to take a year or two, but it's going to happen. And the West doesn't have the capacity, financial capacity, to continue this war as they did before. So this is what the result is. The problem is the end is going to be peaceful, one way or another. The problem is how many lives are going to be lost before that end happens. It can happen with the lives that we already lost, or it can have more lives lost in this process if this war continues.
Andrii, I hope this doesn't go another 2 years. I hope, man, I hope. I am sick of this war, the senseless loss of life. And look, I was one of those people who initially started off optimistic about a deal until I saw Trump's deal. And he has a long way to go before he gets to something Like maybe it's a basis to begin negotiations. But like Colonel Wilkerson said, Trump's going to have to eat crow. And he's going to have to kind of accept that, okay, you lost. You tried and lost, and call it a day. I don't think he's listening to this program. Hopefully, if on some random day he's on YouTube and he sees it and he hears what you're telling him, I hope he listens. Andrii, thank you for this, man. Andrii Telizhenko, former Ukrainian diplomat, whistleblower, and a good friend of the show. You have a good one, man. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Jamal, and I hope that somebody does listen, because I want to come back to my home country one day and come back to something that there will be something to come back to, because that's what I'm fighting for. Because my home country is lost for me right now because of what the U.S. made it to be. So hopefully it does come true. Hopefully somebody does listen, and God bless you all.
Yeah, you have a good one, man. Be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that is rough. That is rough. It's one thing for us to talk about it. It's another thing for it to be your own country, and you see it ripped apart in war. I'll tell you this. I remember when Ethiopia, I think it was Ethiopia, and if you remember, there was the TPLF. Is it TPLF? TPLF? Is that right? It's Tigrayan Liberation Movement, Tigrayan Liberation People's Movement. I think it's the TPLF, where they attacked the Ethiopian government. Now, they had been in power for like 20, 30 years. There was an election. Abiy Ahmed ends up winning that election. They didn't necessarily like the fact that they were out of power, and they end up attacking the government. The United States took a very particular point of view of that and acted as if the Ethiopian government wasn't attacked. And I suspect because we had certain ties to the group that was in power prior for the last 30 years, we're like dictators. And so the media, and the way the media was reporting it as if the Ethiopian government had gone bananas and just started killing people. Abiy Ahmed ends up, if I'm not mistaken, gets a peace prize for making peace with Eritrea. Eritrea ends up helping him in that war. And the papers in the US was so warped in the way that they were talking about it. I knew people who were from Ethiopia at the time that was taking place. And you talk about motivated, like angry at the US, angry at the way it was being reported, so angry, in fact, that the reason that the Republican won in Virginia was because Ethiopians, Eritreans started to vote for the Republican or just didn't vote at all in punishment for the Biden administration because of the press coverage and the way the Biden administration was effectively looking at the conflict. I think it was 70,000 of them, something like that, 100 to 70,000 to 100. And the vote tally of the difference was like 70,000. So they made the difference in that vote to get rid of the Democrat in punishment for the way the Biden administration had looked at that issue. They were very angry. They were motivated. They were going out to protests. They were talking about things that were going back home. And there was that same pain because many of their family members were also part of that party because, they're the same country, right? And in the context of being the same country, they were intermingled often and on different sides politically because of it. And so there was pain associated with it in the way that they were looking at it, in the way that their country was being torn apart. At some point, the Ethiopian government ends up winning, forces a peace or surrender. But I'm pointing out that when your country is at war like that, it hurts. It hurts. You have people, you have family members, you have relatives, you have people who you left back home. That stuff, it digs into you, right? So I feel him when he says that. He's not saying it in the way that we talk about it. It digs deeper into him. And as he points out, that mineral deal comes across a lot as rape more than anything else. I mean, after all, the U.S. gets your country into a war. The U.S. tells you you're going to be with you for as long as it takes. The Biden administration loses. Trump comes in, and Trump says, you owe us money. You owe us money. Hey, I understand that 600,000 of your people are dead, or 700, whatever that number is. I get that. But you owe us money. We're giving you all of this money. You're taking advantage of us. So now you got to pay us back. And so now we have a mineral deal, in quotes, that goes on in perpetuity, that you can borrow against. So if you need weapons, we'll sell them to you, but we're getting that money back from whatever the proceeds come back. Like, that's outrageous. That is the position that Trump took. And Zelensky, who is in a level of desperation at this point, because regardless of what he says, he's out there begging for a ceasefire, a position that he didn't want at first. He's begging for a ceasefire because he's losing. And so Trump has him over a barrel. He has already signed over mineral rights to the UK, and he's coming to Trump signing over even more. Just outrageous. Just completely outrageous. Yeah. So Caleb Maupin, what time is it? Okay, Caleb is going to be here in like 2 or 3 minutes, so it's not really time to hit another story in full. I will, though, point out Trump seems to be losing his mind. He seems to be losing his mind. And for all of the talk about Joe Biden, what is this? And why is this here? I'm sorry. Okay, let me just close this because this is annoying the hell out of me. For all the talk about Joe Biden being out of his mind, Donald Trump is not that far away. Both of them are very ancient men. And being very ancient men, they seem to not... Look, I'll give Trump this. He does more interviews. And in one of the interviews he was doing, he was talking to Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. Smith asked him a question. I'm going to show you that question. I'm going to show you Donald Trump's response. His response is so warped and so outrageous that it's like, did he just misunderstand the question? So this is, Caleb is here. I'll just go to Caleb. My man, I didn't even know you were here. I didn't even hear the bloop bloop. Usually I get a indicator that the person showed up. How you doing, Caleb? You doing all right?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I am doing great. How do you feel? Do you feel better?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, last week I wasn't at the top of my game. You know, I was having a combination of spring allergies and some kind of infection or something. But you know, I've been back online. I've been streaming. It's good to be here. So yeah. Thanks.
That sucks. I feel you on that. Like I think it was a couple of weeks ago I got taken down by a cold myself. But Caleb Maupin, he's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. I think I said author. Did I say author the first time? Okay, I don't know. His new book, Caleb, this is no longer a new book, but I will name it just because it's a book of yours, Kamala Harris and the Future of American Politics. An essay in 3 parts examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse in the geopolitical stage. She failed miserably. So I don't know if I should even name the book. I want to name the book because it's yours. You also have a YouTube channel at this point. I've watched some of your videos. Where can people find you on YouTube?
Yeah, just Caleb Maupin, CalebMaupin. That's my channel, Caleb Maupin TV. You know, I've got a lot of YouTube stuff these days. I'm doing a lot of streams, and my organization is called the Center for Political Innovation, cpiusa.org. We're having a big convention coming up this summer, July 12th, and we're always doing stuff around the country. We had people in the streets just yesterday to support Ibrahim Traore, the leader of Burkina Faso. There was an International Day of Action, and our members were out in the streets in Chicago and in Minneapolis supporting Ibrahim Traore, which was very exciting because, you know, I mean, this is the really exciting revolutionary leader in Burkina Faso who's doing a lot to improve people's lives, but facing a lot of attempted assassinations and such.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, lots going on.
Yeah, we covered that story yesterday. He is under massive pressure, to put it mildly. They tried to poison him. They tried to kill him. He is apparently pulling, nationalizing gold mines or mines with the idea of mining gold. And this is going to be under the auspices of effectively the Sahel states, making banks. Like, that's an astonishing thing at the point where you own the money. And that is one of the big issues with Africa, right? It's a rich country. They just don't own the resources because of the colonization. And so he is effectively doing very different things in the way that he's trying to bring those countries out of poverty. So You have my
Well,
agreement.
I mean, I know he's had a number of really exciting reforms lately. One thing he did is that it is now free to have a baby in Burkina Faso. That any woman who goes to the hospital to deliver a child, no costs. It's all free. He also gave a stipend to all the university students. Anyone who attends university is going to get an official stipend, like a paycheck from the government. So they don't have to work at the same time they go to college. They can just focus on going to college because they're getting a paycheck. These are all very exciting reforms, and he's trying to oversee an agricultural boom. You can read an article on our website that one of our members wrote about how he is really trying to expand their food production capacity in Burkina Faso, so they don't have to import their food. They're having just a farming explosion with the help of Russia, teaming up with Russia to make that farming explosion happen. He's a pro-growth, pro-humanity guy. And he's from an interesting background. I guess he went to, at his college, he was the leader of the Marxist Student Association, but he's also a Muslim, right? I mean, he's religious, he's a Sunni Muslim, but he's also from the Marxist background. And he's very much, he sees himself from the tradition of Gaddafi, of Kwame Nkrumah, the African socialist leader of Ghana. And he's a Pan-Africanist. He wants to eventually unify the African countries. Very exciting. I mean, this is a real revolutionary leader in our generation, right? I think it's really exciting to see him there, but it's also a dangerous situation. We know what happened to Patrice Lumumba. We know what happened to Gaddafi. So the fact that he was able to call this global day of action and people on every continent were out in the streets supporting him, I mean, this is really exciting.
Wow, no, he's fantastic. I mean, he really is. He's been doing a lot of good things. I want to talk about the mineral deal with you. You and I have had this conversation about Donald Trump and this notion of whether or not this idea of when Trump does something good, be perfectly fine with giving him credit for doing something good, especially if his objective is to end the war. Now, when he was running, he said, I'm going to end it in 24 hours. I don't think anybody really believed that, but fair enough. We are 100 days in, and he seems to be looking for every financial advantage and financial domination that he can get his hands on, as opposed to doing the job of just ending the war. And he also doesn't seem to understand the war from the Russian perspective, that it's existential, that you guys have effectively lied multiple times, and on top of lying multiple times, used it to take advantage where you were, as the U.S., killing Russians. I mean, let's be honest. For all intents and purposes, you had Americans on the ground. Americans were directing where the guns were being fired. They were putting money into it. They were using intel. Yes, the other groups in regards to other NATO nations, but the fact that all of those nations are terrified that Trump is going to walk gets across the significance of the U.S. presence in regards to the war. And it just came out that Trump has signed a mineral deal, which has ensconced him that much more into Ukraine. Now, no, there are no security guarantees in the deal. And just because they signed a deal doesn't mean that Trump implicitly is going to send the U.S. military in to fight for, Ukrainian territory. But it ignores the Steve Bannon approach of walk the F away and instead getting more involved in the conflict. Give me your take on this. I mean, how do you see it? I mean, look, I was hopeful that Trump would either walk away or just come up with some kind of reasonable deal that the Russians may accept. Up to this point, that has not been the case.
Well, I think it's a good sign that the mineral deal finally went through. I mean, they've been talking about it for quite some time, and it is part of the process of ending the war as far as the White House is concerned. That said, this war needs to end. I mean, Trump said he would do it within 24 hours of getting into office. It's been over 100 days. And like the whole world is waiting. People are dying on the battlefield as we speak. And it goes to show you that, I mean, it's really not about who's the president. There are much bigger forces at play here. I did appreciate what J.D. Vance recently said, which was, I mean, he was basically saying it to the other forces within the power structure. And he said, there's this idea that Russia is going to collapse, economically, if we just continue this war long enough. He says that's not going to happen. Well, that's good that he said that. And it's also good that he's acknowledging that that was the idea from the beginning, right? I mean, this was just yet another version of the Afghan trap, where they created a situation where Russia felt it had no choice. It has to go in and protect the peoples of the Donbas region. And so Russia, that held off for 8 years, finally had to move in and protect folks. They were facing a threat. They were watching, the ongoing killing of the people. And, they've got a monument to all the children who've been killed called the Alley of Angels. Like, people were dying for 8 years straight in Ukraine. And Russia ultimately had no choice, but they've gone in and I guess the United States was hoping to use Russia's, special military operation, just economically isolate and demolish Russia. This is about hurting Russia. It's not about protecting Ukraine. It's about hurting Russia. But J.D. Vance seems to be the voice of reason, saying, maybe that's what we wanted to do from the beginning. We were going to use this to just economically demolish Russia, but Russia is not going to be economically demolished. That's not going to happen. And that's part of the motivation, it seems, for some forces being willing to agree to a peace deal, is that kind of recognizing that the strategy of isolating Russia has failed. So, I would like to see an agreement. I will say Trump is floundering right now, and I am, wildly disappointed in a lot of things that Trump is doing. I mean, the El Salvador stuff is sickening and horrendous. The way he's targeting pro-Palestine students, he ran on a platform of free speech, and now people are getting kicked out of the country for their free speech. So there's plenty that we can. I mean, Trump is doing a lot of things I really don't like. That said, I still think we're better off than we would have been with Kamala Harris. We're negotiating with Iran right now. Biden said he was going to start negotiating with Iran, and he never did it. Well, it seems that now the USA and Iran are negotiating. There was a 30-day ceasefire in Gaza, and it looks like Donald Trump is, to some degree or other, serious that he wants to end this war. He needs to go ahead and do it. And I will say, if he goes ahead and does it, that would be a good win for him right now, because he's floundering in the polls. I mean, Americans are just not happy. He's not doing well as far as Americans are concerned. The economy is not doing well. He ran on a platform of fixing inflation, and then his tariffs, we got inflation here. I mean, he's really not delivering in a lot of ways. I appreciated how he came forward and said that with Pam Bondi, they weren't going to use the Foreign Agents Registration Act to persecute Americans any longer. That was certainly a good thing that Trump did. And I like seeing the FBI and USAID reined in, but we really haven't seen many wins or many achievements for the Trump administration. So let's hope that ending this war, which it could be, could be days away. I mean, we've been hearing that for quite some time, but we're very close to seeing this war end. We've now got the mineral deal that was a big part of the process, right? Which they've been talking about for months. So now that deal is done. Let's hope that this war just comes to an end, and that then Trump can finally do something he said he was going to do. He can have a win other than going after immigrants. I don't think going after immigrants is a win, but it's something he can say, oh, I said I was going to do it, I'm doing it. Well, yeah, you're doing it, and it's not really working out too great. And, it's not something that I think is really benefiting American communities. That is something you said you're going to do, but you did say you're going to end the Ukraine war. So end it. And also, let me point out, so now at this point, Russia and North Korea are militarily cooperating, right? So I guess there was some dispute. At first, the USA was accusing Russia of having North Korean troops. And then regardless, now Russia and North Korea are allies on the battlefield in Ukraine. So as we're negotiating end of the war in Ukraine, Trump has announced they also plan to resume North Korea talks, and talks on the Korean Peninsula. That's great. Donald Trump, these are two wins that Trump can have. He can end the war in Ukraine. He can go back to North Korea and start the peace process with Kim Jong-un again. Do it. If he wants to turn himself around in the polls, that's what he ought to do, because he's not doing too well right now. I'll just be honest with you. To be fair, he doesn't have to do well right now. And I think Trump is extremely poll conscious, right? And that, there's not an election coming up. I mean, it's, midterms are still a year away. So maybe he's thinking about, okay, I don't have to pull out. I can pull out my wins closer to the voting time. But yeah, that's kind of the way I see it. This tariffs, and Trump's not doing too great right now. This is not a great time for the White House. But there you go. Oh, you're muted.
A few things. The North Korean troops are not in Ukraine. They're in Russia. They were in Kursk based on the security agreement that they signed with Russia. So they weren't fighting in Ukraine. They were fighting in Russian territory.
Yeah.
On the other front, in the war, how do you do that short of just walk away? And he doesn't seem to want to do that. I don't see how the mineral deal gets you closer to ending the war. The mineral deal is just Donald Trump colonizing Ukraine. I don't know what that does in regards to ending the war. If you want to end the war, Putin has said, here are my demands. The loser doesn't get to dictate terms. And Donald Trump doesn't seem, and people around him, doesn't seem to be able to countenance this notion that the U.S. lost. J.D. Vance gets it on some level. Trump gets it implicitly when he says, if this keeps going, Russia's going to take all of Ukraine. I don't know how the mineral deal does any of that. I do see how Trump could go and make a legitimate deal. But the deal he put forth was that the U.S. gets control of Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which is just outrageous. Under Russian law, all of that territory belongs to Russia. And so Russian demand is, if you want a ceasefire, fair enough, we'll give you the ceasefire. But no more intelligence, no more raising a military, no more weapons coming from the UK or France. And these are rational acts because up to this point, even with the Minsk agreements that were signed by all of these other countries, they just used it to build a huge military. So if they're saying we are willing to have talks, Zelensky can't have talks from a law that he put into place that prevented anybody from Ukraine having talks with Russia. So there's that needs to be removed. Two, this idea that we're going to unconditionally stop when we are pressing on the battlefield on all fronts in order to give you time to re-up, reload, drag more conscripts and throw them into the battle. It's nonsense. We're not going to allow that. Trump doesn't seem to get any of that in the deals or nonsense stuff that he's sending Witkoff over in order to offer the Russians. So when you said he can end it, what do you mean? How do you mean he can end it? Does just walk and let Ukraine collapse on the battlefield? Offer a deal that it's legitimate in some way that the Russians can accept? What do you mean? How can he end it? Is what I'm trying to get at. I don't understand how he just snaps his finger and calls it a day.
Well, they have to sign an agreement with Russia, and they have to cut off any U.S. aid, and they have to lift the sanctions. I mean, what I'm hearing in the media is a little odd. So I guess there was all this anger that the agreement was going to recognize Crimea as being part of Russia. And I'm thinking, like, Crimea has been part of Russia since 2014. I mean, this is like, that's a done deal. The real issue at hand in the negotiations is kind of like what you're pointing out. Where is the border going to be, in the new republics, right? I mean, that is the real crux of the issue. That's where Ukraine and Russia have their really serious disagreement. Yeah, there are a lot of hardcore fanatics and people who, follow Western media who insist Crimea is part of Ukraine. But in reality, Crimea is not part of Ukraine, and it's not going to be. And there's even before, the vote in 2014, there was a huge Russian military base there. The idea, I mean, Crimea, that's a done deal. That's over. That's been over for a long time. The real issue is what's going on in the new republics.
Yeah.
That was an odd diversion that I thought the media was on. But yeah, there's going to have to be a new border drawn to some degree. And I also wonder, like, is this going to be like one of those like frozen conflicts? Is it going to be like a situation because there are quite a few places, and this is not widely known, there are quite a few places across the former Soviet Union where there are disputed borders. There's South Ossetia, which, is, technically part of Georgia, but doesn't recognize the Georgian government, is sympathetic to Russia. There are, there are disputed borders throughout the former USSR where, Russia and its allies are on one side and the West is on another and such. So, I mean, is this going to be like that? Is it going to be that kind of situation where Ukraine, claims that, it has the new republics and there's seats in the Ukrainian parliament representing the Donetsk and Lugansk, but yet, the official border is drawn here. I mean, how is this going to go? Right. I think the idea, though, if there's going to be a treaty, The idea of a treaty is that there will be an agreement by all parties. The Korean Peninsula is a great example. There's no treaty on the Korean Peninsula. There are two governments that claim ownership of the entire Korean Peninsula. The government of North Korea is not North Korea. It's the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. They consider themselves the government of all of Korea. And in South Korea, they're not South Korea, they're Republic of Korea. And they consider themselves to be the legitimate government of all of Korea. And there's never been a treaty or an agreement between the two countries about, that the 38th parallel that goes through the Korean Peninsula is not a border. It's just a military armistice. There was a war that happened, and the war ended frozen. I mean, there was an armistice, but there was never an agreement. And so there's not two countries on the Korean Peninsula. There's one country, and there's, that's contending for power, with two governments that claim it. The government on Taiwan, what is it legally called? It's called the Republic of China. And and they consider themselves to be the legit government of the entire, Chinese mainland. However, the USA withdrew its recognition, recognizes the government on the mainland. And then there's, you have the Taiwan separatists, the people that say, well, we just want to be Taiwan. We don't want to be we don't want to be China anymore. But overall, there is disagreement there. And I wonder, is that going to be the situation here? Is it going to be that Ukraine just doesn't recognize the reality that the new republics are Russia at this point? They're part of Russia. They voted to join with Russia. The Ukrainian government bombed them and just attacked them for 8 years. And now they're there, and they've become the new republics of Russia. And is that going to be something that Ukraine doesn't have to recognize as part of the peace agreement, or does recognize? I mean, how does that work? But if we're serious, at the end of the day, if we're serious, this war can end. There are some forces that just don't want it to end. And that's what's becoming very, very clear here, is that there's a lot invested here, and there's a lot bigger forces here than simply Donald Trump's personal will. I mean, there's a lot of money on the line, and et cetera. I mean, the whole mineral thing, that's a weird aspect of the Trump administration. Do you remember when he was running the first time, he was complaining that the USA didn't get Iraq's oil? And he said, "Oh, it's like, at least we should have at least gotten the oil." I mean, that whole thing was very, very odd. And it was almost like, it would have been worth invading Iraq if we'd ended up getting the oil. And I mean, a lot of people have pointed out what was there for the U.S. in Iraq, right? It wasn't like a war of plunder, like they're going to get the oil. It was that Iraq was a major oil exporting country that was a competitor on the international markets. All kinds of people were buying oil from Iraq and its state-run oil company, and not buying it from U.S. Controlled and dominated Saudi Arabia, not buying it from BP and Chevron and ExxonMobil. And then Iraq was destroyed by shock and awe. And now whatever oil they have, their exports are very low. I mean, it's about 10% of what it once was under Saddam Hussein. I mean, they're just not selling oil, right? So it's like, yeah, so maybe the little bit of oil that they are selling now, they're selling to China or something. But that's not the point. The point is that a major competitor with Wall Street was destroyed. And the same for Libya. I mean, Libya, used to be a major oil exporting country. And then after the overthrow of Gaddafi, yeah, they're selling a little bit of oil, but not very much. They've been blown to bits. And now they're exporting like maybe 10% of the amount of oil they were exporting before. So it's not about like going there and getting their stuff. It's about removing a competitor from the market. If you have a business, if you have a bicycle shop and there's a bicycle shop across the street, do you want to go there and take it over and have two bicycle shops? No, you just want to blow it up, and then everyone has to buy from you. You don't need two bicycle shops. That's an expense to maintain. And I think that's kind of how people were not understanding it. I remember after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, the gas prices in America went through the roof, and all kinds of people were saying to me, "Well, Caleb, I thought we were going there to get their oil, and now the gas prices through the roof." Well, I look back on that now. I know what was happening was the gas prices were through the roof because a major oil exporting country was blown to bits and destroyed, and it drove up the oil prices to the highest they'd been. And all the people that used to buy their oil from Iraq now had to buy it from us, and that was a great perfect storm situation. So the idea, like, well, at least we got something, we got their minerals, like that's just a very odd way of framing it.
Yeah, it's just the way he thinks. Like in his mind, it's, well, they need to pay us back. That's the way he thinks about it, not in this kind of geopolitical thing of, okay, well, we want to go after Russia, and this is our, long, our Cold War enemy that now we have an opportunity where we can use a proxy to do it. In his mind, it's what can we get out of it? He doesn't think in these. I don't think he thinks in these kind of large geopolitical, like for example, Joe Biden. People used to say Joe Biden was out of his mind, and I would agree with them. But I would point out from a foreign policy sense, Joe Biden was a neocon, and Joe Biden had a very clear understanding of we need to take down Russia. If we can take down Russia, we need to expand NATO. We need to expand it to the border. We need to invite them into NATO if they can get into NATO. It will take a test of strength from Ukraine, and if Ukraine can win, we'll have a NATO country with a massive military on the border of Russia that hates their guts because they're effectively powered by Nazis. Like that was the way Joe Biden was thinking about it. That's the way many of the Europeans thought about it. I don't think Trump thinks it in those terms like that. I think he thinks, why are we there? And if we're there, might as well get something out of it.
Right.
Like it may be a simplistic way to look at it, but I think that's the way he looks at it.
Yeah, it's kind of this crude nationalism.
Yeah.
And this is also, I think the mineral deal is something that Trump can show to his supporters to get them to say it's okay to sign a peace deal with Russia. Okay, well, he got us the minerals. So, all right, well, we got something out of it. It wasn't a total, and he made sure Ukraine had to sign over. It's a lot of grandstanding. And a lot of what the Trump administration does, I feel like, is they're trying to please multiple people at the same time, right? So, I mean, it's kind of like with the Middle East, the USA is negotiating with Iran. Israel certainly doesn't want that. But yet they're deporting these pro-Palestine students and they're, having the FBI go after them. And again, that's something Trump can say, well, I went after them, under Joe Biden, they were protesting at Harvard, but now I'm doing all of this. So then that gives him the ability to negotiate with Iran. Right. And it's like, there's a lot of like, I'll do something kind of theatrical that will please certain people while I do something else that may not be as popular with those people, but then they can't complain about it because I did this other thing or say, there's a lot of that going on. There is also an element of, he's trying to appease people who think in a certain way. I remember when I was, years ago, I was protesting. We had an anti-war demonstration at Times Square. And there was a young kid who had just enlisted in the U.S. military at the time, and he came over and he was arguing with us, and he was saying the USA is not imperialist. He was saying, but we should be, right? Because there's too many poor people here, and we need to just we send our military all over the world. We need to get stuff when we go invade country, and his town was poor and all of that, and he wishes the USA was imperialist, but we're just too nice. Our military is just this. We're just going around rescuing people and all of that, but we should be imperialist so people from small towns like his in Pennsylvania could get more money. Well, it's kind of tragic that he feels that way, but it's like, well, we're not going around. The U.S. military is not a humanitarian organization that's going around helping people. But that's the way it's framed. But it's not helping people in small towns like his. It's helping Wall Street bankers. It's helping Wall Street maintain their control of the world. And so he's confused, right? Because he's like, he's saying, I'm getting my people, my community is getting poorer in Pennsylvania. But yet, we're all over the world, and it must be that we're just not being imperialist enough, right? And there's a certain way that people are being trained to think about things, and I think that Trump is kind of playing into that mindset a little bit as well, and that's a little bit dangerous. But again, it is a pushback against the liberal humanitarian rhetoric that's a cover for U.S. wars, right? I've heard people, we're always told these wars, we're sending weapons to Ukraine and we're sending troops to Afghanistan and all that because we just want to help these people. And you do have a layer of low income, white working class people that are like, well, damn it, help us for a minute. Help us, do something for us, right? And so
they're not wrong for that.
Yeah, right. They're wrong to think that we're doing what we're doing around the world as a humanitarian operation. They're wrong to think that. But then it's like, well, that we should do it in a way that is more economically plundering rather than this humanitarian stuff. And this is kind of an aspect of right-wing rhetoric that is interesting, and it's tragic, and it's confused, and it's incorrect. But there is an understanding that our communities in the United States are not benefiting from these wars but there's a confused belief that somehow, like, is this mineral deal going to make our lives better as Americans? No. Are we getting anything from this? But I think there's people in Trump's camp who think we are, and they're like, okay, well, Biden was just giving them weapons, but now Trump is making them give over their minerals. All right, he's art of the deal. He's fighting for us. It's like, no, he's not really fighting for us. We're not getting anything out of it. Really, very few Americans are going to economically benefit from this mineral deal. So yeah,
it's like a very small percentage at the very top that is going to be like investors and those type of things that are going to be able to, you know, effectively colonize Ukraine. I mean, UK also has a deal with them, meaning Zelensky is selling out. That's the wild part, right? Andrii was on the show. Andrii is Ukrainian, and he points out it's kind of like, so Zelensky is selling out Ukraine. It's not just minerals, oil, gas, anything that you can pull out of the ground effectively, indefinitely, in order to maintain a war that the majority of Ukraine doesn't even want, and is willing to make territorial concessions if it means stopping the war. That is mind-blowing, right? Basically, people are getting rich off of maintaining a war that we are losing and that we have fundamentally lost, and that the majority of the public doesn't even want to keep going. That's just heartbreaking, to put it mildly. I want to move to Iran for a bit, because you mentioned Iran, and I want to get your take on what you think is going on in the negotiations with that. But before I let this one go, are you optimistic that he is flexible enough to get a deal with Russia? Because keep in mind, Zelensky seemed to have gone rogue. The UK and EU are fundamentally delusional, and they are living up their delusion. And even if I accept that Trump may want a deal, I think what Trump wants is a frozen conflict. And the problem with a frozen conflict is you can come back around to it later. Like, it's like, we're going to freeze this the way it is. And then at a later date, when Europe has built up its forces, however long that takes, that's assuming that even happens, right? I mean, Europe is a basket case right now. Or a new administration comes in, we may reinvigorate this conflict. I mean, the people in Ukraine, they're not talking about this in the sense of, let's make a deal. They're talking about it as a temporary ceasefire. Effectively, we will reinvigorate this. We will get our lands back. We will attack Russia at some point. That's the way they're talking about it. If you're talking about Klitschko and some of these other goons that are in Ukraine, they're not looking at this as a settlement in a way that Trump is talking about it.
Well, I see a lot of signs that indicate that the fighting in Ukraine is going to stop, and that the terms of that are just what's being worked out right now. But yet I also am seeing a lot of stalling. It's been a while, and this war has been so close to ending for so long. And on the one hand, I hope that we can just have an agreement, and I hope that Trump has enough independence to do that. And I hope that Zelensky is kind of forced to go along with it, and that we can see a de-escalation. But I also am disturbed that it's taking so long, and I'm perplexed about aspects of, I mean, there's certain issues that really do need to be discussed that don't involve Crimea, that don't involve sanctions being lifted, that really involve borders, and I'm not seeing that coming up in the discussion, and that's really the point of contention. So I honestly don't know. If we're not able to see the war end, I will say that will be an absolute disaster. Not for Russia. Russia can keep going, and that they've made that clear. Russia can keep going. It'll be a disaster for those of us in the Western world that want peace, and it'll be a big failure for the Trump administration. If Trump can't have the win of ending this war, I mean, he's going to have very little to hang his hat on. This is a win that Trump needs politically. That represents the majority opinion of the American people, but it puts Trump at odds with the power structure in Washington. I mean, that there is, commitment to opposition to Russia is like an industry in America. And if Trump is not able to override the hate Russia industry and just make this deal, I think Trump will have had a major, major loss.
And by the way, to his base also, his base is singular. When this first happened, when Trump first got in, and Steve Bannon, I think he was talking to Michael Tracy, and Steve Bannon was like, walk the F away. He said, just leave. He said, don't do an investigation. Don't do nothing. Just walk. I don't care if you look into any crimes or anything like that. I don't, just walk, leave it. Joe Biden's war, call it that, and walk away. And Trump didn't listen. And instead, he's like, I want to get a deal. What he heard was, oh, I can get a mineral deal? You give me minerals? Oh, okay, let's make a deal. That's what he heard. Hence the mineral deal, in which case you get this kind of vulgar, gangsterism, where he's like, what can I get out of this? It's just wild. Witkoff, I would tell you this. When Witkoff came back and was on Sean Hannity, he was so optimistic. It was infectious. Like Witkoff was talking about like European security going for the foreseeable future. And we're going to have trillions of dollars of entanglements, economic entanglements that's going to bring a new relationship between America and, I mean, he was all over the place. And now, not so much. Not so much. It's just fascinating. I want to go to Iran. What do you think is happening with that Iran deal? There are two strands of thought. One strand of thought is that the United States is negotiating with a position that it knows Iran can't accept in order to come back later and say, well, we tried to negotiate, but they wouldn't accept our terms. We were being reasonable. And so now we're stuck with having to attack Iran, unprovoked attack on another country. Or do you think Witkoff is an honest actor in that negotiation? Meaning he sidelines the hawks, the neocons, the whack jobs. He sent Witkoff, who's supposed to be a realist, in order to have a negotiation with the idea of trying to actually get a deal, because he knows that all of these other lunatics are in his flanks and pushing him to actually attack Iran. Which one do you think it is?
Well, having been to Iran a number of times, I see that there are multiple entities at play here. I tell people that Iran, in my assessment, having been there, having talked to people, is about a third in terms of the population. First, you have a layer of people that are quite wealthy, that go to the neighborhoods of northern Tehran and such. And there's a layer of people who don't support the Islamic Republic and think that the Islamic Republic is not helpful, that kind of resent it, consider it to be authoritarian, are kind of in love with America, watch American propaganda. That's about a third of the country. Then you've got a layer of people in the country that think the Islamic Republic has done some good things. It's industrialized, it's opposing Israel, it's made Iran a stronger country, etc. They're not fully on board with exactly everything the Supreme Leader talks about, but they think, they've done some good things, and it's about a third of the country. They're mildly sympathetic to the Iranian government, but they also, maybe they listen to American propaganda, maybe they criticize different things, maybe they wish they had more civil liberties or whatever, but they're more solidly with the government. And then you have a layer of people that are all in, that are, dedicated. And, the biggest economic entity in Iran is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is a military organization that is accountable only to the Supreme Leader, not the elected, parliament, not the government of Iran. You have people in Iran who are ready to die. I mean, Shia Islam really emphasizes martyrdom and the willingness to die for the oppressed on the battlefield, and the kind of social justice, anti-imperialist goals and principles of the Islamic Revolution. And you have a third of people that are really revolutionary, that are loyal to the Islamic Republic and are very much invested in international stuff, whether it's the war in Yemen. They see the Houthis as great heroes, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon, whether it's, rallying against Israel and mobilizing against Israel. The last Friday of Ramadan was declared by Khomeini to be the day of Al-Quds, where the Muslims of the world would rally to eventually retake Jerusalem from Israel. And that there's a third of the people in the country that are very much, fanatical and dedicated to the principles of the Republic. And what I see here is that on the one hand, right, Iran overall, as a matter of pride, has the right to peaceful nuclear energy. As participants of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, they have the right to peaceful nuclear energy. They made huge concessions, basically giving up their peaceful nuclear energy program in 2015 as part of the Iran nuclear deal. And as a result, they didn't really benefit economically. And then, Qasem Soleimani, their national hero, was killed and all of that. And that, so on the one hand, you have overall Iranian society that is negotiating the terms of how much of a peaceful nuclear energy program will they have. That seems to be what they're negotiating with the United States. How much of a peaceful nuclear energy program are we going to have? Since we're allowed to have it, but how much of it are we going to have? And then on the other hand, you have Pete Hegseth and others that are just furious because the Houthis are kicking ass. And I mean, the Houthis are kicking ass. I mean, and U.S. battleships are leaving the region because they're so devastated by Houthi attacks, and that the Ansar Allah movement that's inspired by the Islamic Revolution of Iran, which is based on, Shia Islamic revolutionary principles, that very much is kind of an extension of that Islamic revolutionary spirit of Khomeini and others. They are like a force to be reckoned with that has, stopped ships and brought Israel to its knees in a lot of ways and is just shaking the whole world. And so on the one hand, they want to negotiate with, just Iran, but they have to negotiate with a big section of Iran, which is this, revolutionary foreign policy, Islamic Revolutionary Guard faction that the Houthis very much are tied in with, and that they don't like the Houthis, and they are angry about what the Houthis are doing, and it's a big mess. And this was a big point of disagreement in the original Iran nuclear deal in 2015. The reason it took so long is because the USA really, really wanted that the Iran nuclear deal would restrict to some degree or other the Iran's support for Hezbollah, Iran's support for the movement in Bahrain. The Shia majority of Bahrain would like to have a Shia government in Bahrain, but they have a Sunni king imposed on them by Saudi Arabia. They don't have democracy in Bahrain, and that to restrict Iran's kind of revolutionary, foreign policy and the Islamic Revolutionary Guards and et cetera. And Javid Zarif just made clear in the negotiating table with John Kerry, look, I can't control those people. They're above me. I'm a representative, Javid Zarif, who was negotiating. He was a representative of the president of Iran at that point. It was Rouhani. And he said, I can't sign an agreement that those people will stop their activities in Yemen, or those people will stop their activities in Lebanon or whatever. I can't do that because they're not under my jurisdiction. They're above me. They're loyal to the supreme leader, and they are this entity that is really, they're not even, they don't even really consider themselves to be Iranian, right? They're global, and they're dedicated to anti-imperialist principles and a kind of global revolutionary perspective. And that Javid Zarif was just not able to make some kind of agreement with the Obama administration that, okay, we'll restrict them from going here or there. He can't do that. And so Pete Hegseth is angry at the Houthis, is angry at Iran for supporting the Houthis, but the negotiations that Witkoff is engaging with are with forces that really don't have the ability to rein in that support. That is an entity that is kind of beyond what the elected president and the elected administration can do. I mean, that's above them, and it's almost like a separate entity. And I guess that's kind of hard to understand, but it's like, in the USA, yeah, if you negotiate with the USA, the US Marines and the US Navy and all of that is who you're negotiating with. In Iran, it's not like that. In Iran, if you're negotiating with the elected government about what kind of nuclear power plants they can have, that's very different than what the Islamic Revolutionary Guards are doing, and what the global anti-imperialist movement that's based in Iran is doing. That's not the same entity, and I think that's the issue in these negotiations that a lot of folks are not really understanding.
From my understanding, initially Witkoff came back and sounded very similar to Arghachi, foreign minister of Iran. I'm maybe mispronouncing his name. Both of them sounded like they were talking about nuclear energy. Iran has said flat out, we are not getting rid of our enrichment program. It is our right as a sovereign country, and we're going to keep that right. And initially, it sounded like Witkoff agreed. When he was on Sean Hannity first time around, both were talking about 3.6% enrichment. All right, no issue. Then Witkoff gets attacked. Now, Witkoff has been getting attacked the entire way through. They've called him a Russian bot. His perspective is like he's a Putin puppet. They call him weak on the issue of Iran. And after getting attacked, he comes back out, puts out a tweet, and the tweet effectively says, look, this is going to be a Trump deal. The deal is going to be what the president wants, etc. Witkoff starts to talk less, and Rubio starts to talk, which from my point of view, like, oh God, now Rubio is piping up, meaning the edifice that was sidelined at one point is now in pictures with Donald Trump and is now making statements saying they need to get rid of their entire enrichment program, which from right off the bat, it was understood was a red line. That was something Iran said we're not going to do. So after getting pressure from, let's say, the neocons, the hawks in the administration, Donald Trump upped his demands on Witkoff in those negotiations and sends, what is the guy named Michael Anton, another hawk, in order to be the person dealing with the technical details of the program. As they point out, the third negotiation was far more tense than the other two negotiations because what the U.S. was asking for was something that was a red line that Iran had already said from the very beginning, off the table. And so I guess my thing is this a situation where Trump, his instincts might have been, I want to get a deal. And so I'm sitting near the guy who I think can actually get me a deal. And then with pressure from people around him, pushing him to go further with maximalist demands, in this case, the Libyan model, in the way that Netanyahu pointed out. And look, let's be honest, many of the people who are around Trump are pushing him for a war. They want a war. As you pointed out, the blob loves this notion of going to war with Iran. As Wesley Clark said, Iran is the last guy standing. All of the people around Trump are effectively Zionists and fully believe that Iran is the last man standing. Netanyahu has taken this opportunity, believing this is our shot. We got the president that we wanted. We're going to go for it with the belief that Trump is the guy who's going to deliver it. Now, Trump initially said, I'm rejecting this notion of an attack. We're going to have a negotiation. But there are policy documents that point to a plan just like this. What is it? Pathway to Persia, where they talk about the U.S. needs to negotiate. They need to negotiate to make it look as if they're being legitimate in a negotiation. And then when a negotiation fall apart because the U.S. has asked for something that Iran will not give, that they can now use that as a pretext to attack Iran, saying, hey, we're trying to negotiate in good faith, so now we can attack you, despite the fact that you're not a threat to us. That is the way some people see it. And I got to be honest with you, that is the way I see it, especially until they get a deal and until they come up with something that is less of a red line in what they're pushing for. Initially, I thought, okay, well, Witkoff is a realist. Maybe he's sending a realist, he's sidelining the State Department. But at the point where Rubio starts running his mouth, then I'm like, oh God, Rubio is now the mouthpiece. And if Rubio is the mouthpiece, you effectively have a Zionist neocon warmonger as the mouthpiece for negotiation that is effectively taking place. That's, even though Witkoff is the guy who's doing the negotiation, the fact that Rubio is the one that's talking to the press and is the one who's making these statements gives me this impression that that's the plan, that's the policy that Witkoff is now running with. What do you think of that thought? I mean, do you take that as too cynical? Do you take that as, okay, well, that could be legit considering people of policy and the people that Donald Trump have around him are whack jobs? How do you view that take?
Well, I mean, I certainly hope that you're not correct. I really hope we don't attack Iran and go to have a war. And but at the same time, I can see that that certainly, is part of the playbook. If they were planning a war with Iran, they would want to have fake negotiations first, kind of like with Iraq, where they had the inspection team go to Iraq and then, the inspector they were not there to actually look for weapons of mass destruction. They were there to cause trouble, to create a situation where Iraq would expel the weapons and then say, oh, look, but that said, everything I hear from the Trump administration, right? So Trump, he was against the Iran nuclear deal, right? That was the whole thing, right? Oh, Obama sold out to Iran. It was a bad deal. I could make such a better deal. And being against the Iran nuclear deal, all the stuff Trump was repeating about being against the Iran nuclear deal was all bullshit. It was all just, Zionist bullshit that are, the USA gave Iran the right to have a nuclear bomb. No, they did not. The USA, it was like the way that they were talking about the Iran nuclear deal at the time and the stuff that Trump was repeating and riding on to talk about the Iran nuclear deal was all bullshit. At this point, Wickoff is essentially renegotiating exactly what Obama was negotiating. It's the exact same issue, which is that basically we're going to recognize that Iran has the right to peaceful nuclear energy, but we're going to demand that they get rid of almost all of it, as a favor to us, right? So it's like, okay, you have the right to this, but you only get to do a very, 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 very tiny amount of it. And if we can agree on that, I mean, it's like the whole thing, but Trump is grandstanding because he has to, there's a layer of like anti-Democratic Party, Iran, pro-Israel people that Trump is like grandstanding for, right? So there's an element of like Trump grandstanding, and then it's like, well, he's the deal maker, he's the art of the deal, he's going to make a good deal with Iran. I mean, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And I believe there are people in Trump's camp who don't want a deal to actually work. And I think there are other people in Trump's camp that want Trump to be able to say, well, I made a good deal with Iran. That deal that Obama made was awful, but I made a good deal with Iran. And I will say I am, that whole signal chat thing that was revealed and all of that, it does make me realize that on some degree, I think that as much as that many of the people in the Trump camp are blind supporters of Israel, many of them really hate Iran, etc. I do think for his own reasons, Donald Trump does not want to be remembered as a guy who started a war, as a guy who started a big war. He doesn't want to be remembered that way. It just wouldn't be good for him politically. And that Donald Trump would very much like to find a way that he can get credit internationally, and he can make the people who hate Iran very happy and feel like they got what they wanted, but not actually get us into a war with Iran. And so I am confident to some degree that Trump would like to not get into a war with Iran. There are people in his administration that certainly wouldn't mind and would be happy to march us into a war with Iran. I don't think that's necessarily what Trump wants to do, but he has to play a weird game of, it's kind of like with Ukraine, where he's tap dancing and he's got to make a lot of different people happy in the process. And how is he going to be able to please the people he needs to please and not actually go to war with Iran? Because if he goes to war with Iran, I mean, the American people don't want that. Polls show the American people just don't want that. I mean, that would be, again, another epic disaster for his administration. He needs to sign an agreement with Russia, and he needs to maneuver this Iran stuff in a way that he can claim that he's being tough on Iran and he's sticking it to Iran and all that, but not actually go to war. Because if he goes to war, he's again, that'll be an epic loss for the Trump administration, and it would be World War III. It would be an absolute disaster. I mean, if the USA were to actually go to war with Iran, that's like an Armageddon scenario. So, he can't actually pursue that, even though there seem to be some nuts in his administration who wouldn't mind.
Caleb, from your mouth to God's ears, I will tell you, my initial impression was, okay, his instincts are not to do that. That was my first impression. But I've seen all of these governments in the Middle East take an L. And so it's like, I can't ignore that in the context of, the people who have around him. I don't know, from your mouth to God's ears. I hope he just, whatever he gets, he comes out and sells it. All right, this is what I got. This is a win. I promised that I was going to do this. And so this is what I've done. And it ends up being like a JCPOA 2.0. Yeah. That's what I hope takes place. Caleb, man, thank you for this. I always appreciate having you on. I really do enjoy these conversations. Yeah. Caleb Maupin, Caleb, and just the name of the organization you are associated with, it's CPI, but can you give the
Center for Political Innovation, cpiusa.org. We're doing great stuff. Our national convention is coming up in Chicago, July 12th. It's going to be a big event. You're invited, of course, Jamarl. I know you may not be able to make it, but you are absolutely invited. And it's going to be a great gathering opposing imperialism. A lot of people and a lot of exciting things are happening. We're giving out. I have my book about Yemen that I wrote. We're giving out. We have 1,000 copies of this book that we've printed with the poster for our convention on the back that we're giving out. Right, so those are being given out all over the Chicago area right now.
Now, what is the name of the book, just so people will know?
Who are the Houthis? What are they fighting for? And we're going to pro-Palestine events all over the Chicago area and giving out a special edition of the book with a poster of our upcoming convention on it. Door hanger flyers are going up on doors, and I mean, we're we're doing a lot of exciting stuff. We're talking with local communities. There's going to be a Shia Muslim speaker. It looks like there's going to be somebody representing the Russian American community of the Chicago area will be speaking at the event. Some musical performers, traditional performers from the Russian American community are going to be performing. And I mean, this event is really turning into something. So, some big name speakers are in the works, not ready to announce yet, but it's going to be something. So if you go to one event this year for anti-imperialism, I would come to our convention, July 12th in Chicago. It's going to be quite a shindig, quite a gathering.
Badass. And just what all this will know, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, author, fantastic guests in general, can talk about some of anything. I came across you. I think I was watching your show or something like that. By the way, he's also on YouTube under Caleb Maupin, so you can check him out there. Can talk about pretty much anything. And I was fascinated just listening to you. So, man, thank you. I always appreciate you joining me.
Always a pleasure.
Okay?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. We are waiting on Professor Wolff. I sent him an email. I haven't heard back from him yet. I do not know what's going on. Usually he is like a clock. This is the day that I actually really want him to join me. It's the economic news. That's why I really want him to join me. He would be a really good guest to have for today. I booked it last week. It's possible he may have forgotten. I hope he did not forget, and he is just running a little bit late. But today would be the perfect day. He is not insufferable. Caleb is awesome. Caleb is awesome. He knows his stuff. Let me see. I planned on Professor Wolff, so I didn't necessarily plan for another segment because I assumed Professor Wolff would join us. I will show one thing, though, before I'll give him a bit of time to see if his person hits me back and responds. Up to this point, there's been no response from him. But Trump was on News Nation last night. Just because you're talking to a Black person doesn't mean you need to tout how popular you are with Black people. And he is right here. News Nation. They asked him a question about going after Harvard. Stephen A. Smith is asking him. The question is about Harvard. I just want to nail that down. The question is about Harvard.
Time. Mr. President, thank you for your time. It's interesting that you brought up Harvard, because when people think about Harvard, what they're basically talking about is they're asking, what do you say to those who view your actions as an attack on academic freedom rather than a defense of fairness? What do you say to that?
Well, I say this: we had riots in Harlem, in Harlem, and frankly, if you look at what's gone on, and people from Harlem went up and they protested, Stephen. And they protested very strongly against Harvard. They happened to be on my side. You know, I got a very high Black vote. You know that. Very, very high Black vote. It was a very great compliment to me. I did criminal justice reform. I did opportunity zones for one of the greatest economic deals ever for the Black and Hispanic community. I got tremendous. They agree with what I'm doing with respect to Harvard. Harvard gets 4 or 5
time. Mr. President, thank you for your time. It's interesting that you brought up Harvard, because when people think about Harvard, what they're basically talking about is they're asking, what do you say to those who view your actions as an attack on academic freedom rather than a defense of fairness? What do you say to that?
Well, I say this: we had riots in Harlem, in Harlem, and.
Sorry about that. I was resending the link to Professor Wolff, just in case there was any kind of anomaly with it before. Look, he was asking him, Donald Trump has this weird tendency. When you ask him a question directly, he wanders off in the way that Joe Biden used to wander off and, just randomly walking into places and everything else. You're attacking academic freedoms at the behest of a foreign government that is radically anti-American. What do you say to people who point that out? Well, Black people love me. Black people are voting for me. Black people love me to bits. Okay, Mr. President, I get that. That's not true, but I get that. Yeah, what does that have to do with Harvard? He does that a lot, whether it's on the economic news, whether that's on any particular news. He has a tendency to do that. It is deeply aggravating when you actually want to get an actual answer out of him. Give me 1 second. I just want to send this, and I want to make sure it's going to everybody, because I really want him to join me. And okay, let's go for this email. Maybe I'm sending it to the wrong email. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's cross our fingers. I really want him to join. I really want him to join. Love Professor Wolff, especially when he gets the opportunity to kind of go through economic news as economic news is coming out. And I imagine that he will have a lot to say about what is taking place. I'm sorry, there's still construction upstairs. Yeah, we'll see. Caleb's point of view, I appreciate and I do accept. I just don't know. For one, I don't know how signing a mineral deal gets you closer to a peace deal with Russia. I don't know how that works. So there's that part. But let's put that to the side. When you get into this notion of the negotiations itself, I think Trump is working off of a basis that is mistaken and misguided. I think he's looking at this stuff from a business standpoint. Oh, I just want to get a deal. I just need to, come up with something that tees to consign. I think what he misses is that from the Russian point of view, this is on their border. This is existential. And because it's existential, and it's something that the United States effectively pushed and provoked. So the country that provoked it is now the country that is trying to come up with a deal as if it's a mediator when it's a participant to the conflict. Okay, I get that Trump wants to say this is Joe Biden's war. Russia doesn't look at it as Joe Biden's war. Russia looks at it as an American war that's trying to take down Russia. And the blood that they've shed in that war came from America pushing Ukrainians, giving them weapons, giving them intelligence, giving them bombs, bullets, and all of these other things in order to shed that blood. And so this is not just, hey, let's sign some deal on the side and we'll pass some sanctions. And it's not that. It's we need to deal with the causes of the conflict, full stop. Meaning the thing that provoked this conflict is the thing that we want to get to the heart of and we want to stop from happening again. And if we can't do that over the negotiating table, then we would do it on the battlefield. Period. If Trump doesn't get that, then Trump doesn't get a deal. Now, he has a difficult time getting Zelensky on board. Europe is doing everything in their power in order to prevent this deal from taking place. And from the Russian point of view, they want this stuff to be legally binding. And so there again, you have hit a sticking point. How do you make something like this legally binding? What they want is unconditional surrender. Now, let's say they're willing to accept something less than unconditional surrender, and they're willing to accept a negotiated settlement. What does that mean? Does Zelensky stay in power in a negotiated settlement? Are the territories that are under the Russian control, do they have to be acknowledged by Ukraine in a negotiated settlement? That's what they want. Denazification of Ukraine, no NATO in Ukraine, demilitarized Ukraine, no nuclear missiles in Ukraine. I hope you get my point. These are all sticking points that need to be resolved. And if they can't be resolved over the negotiating table, they're resolved on the battlefield. Russia doesn't care if you say you guys are bad people. They don't care. They don't care if you pass additional sanctions. You already have 20,000 sanctions on them. Their economy is doing fine. Europe's economy is collapsing. So again, that is not even the main thrust of what is taking place in regards to why they're continuing the conflict. It's not that. Unless Trump gets that, And as Colonel Wilkerson said, is willing to eat some crow as an American president, as opposed to taking this, well, I'm the boss, and so I'm going to come in. Dude, they don't look at you that way. China doesn't look at you that way. I'm not sure much of the world looks at you that way at this point. That is your own self-conception, and that is American self-conception of their president. That is different than external conception of the U.S. and, for that matter, the U.S. president. So if you deal with them, you're going to have to deal with them on some level equal terms, and you're going to have to somehow understand their larger terms. This is where I disagree with Ted Raw, the 90%, what they get with it. I don't buy the premise. The reality of it is a war was started on their border by the West that used Ukraine as a proxy to try to create a strategic defeat on the military terms and economic terms. And now the US, the same purveyor that provoked that war, is now trying to come in with a deal that they are coming up with as if Russia is going to accept it. They don't need your deal. As Captain America said, they can do this all year or all week or all 2 years, meaning they can keep going. They have the manpower, 30,000, X number of a week or something like that. Ukraine is the one that is begging for a ceasefire. Ukraine is the one that cannot replace their ranks. Ukraine is the one that is running out of bullets, artillery, air power, or let's say anti-aircraft weaponry and all this other stuff. They are the ones that are in the lurch, not Russia. So this threat to pull out, if you need to do that, have at it. Good. Ukraine will collapse sooner. That's the way they look at it. And so, from the Russian point of view, yeah, we can negotiate, but we're not stopping on the battlefield. And the longer you take to come up with a deal that's legitimate, that we can work with, or you can sit down and actually, put your ADD to the side and actually have a conversation for us to hammer out something, the weaker Ukraine gets, the more Nazis we shoot in the face, the more westward we go. That is the way they're looking at it. I don't know what the mineral deal have to do with that. Now, fact of the matter is, I don't even know how they expect the mineral deal to come into fruition while the war is continuing to take place. And I'll go further. What is included in the mineral deal becomes less and less and less the more territory Russia takes. So whatever amount of kilometers that you may have now, in 6 months, it will be less. And in another 6 months, the amount that you would have to exploit will be that much less. So I keep saying delusion is a magical place. It's a wonderful place to be. Sun shines all the time. There is no cold days. Weather is perfect. Pizza's fantastic. But reality is different, right? There are cold days. Pizza sometimes is not that great. It rains at times. And I'm saying from the standpoint of the Ukrainian position, it is raining. From the European position, it is raining. Ted Raw was right about whether or not Ukraine or Europe would be able to gin up a military when their governments are broke. They can't even put 25,000 troops on the battlefield. Even if they try to spin up their industries, there's a question of whether or not they could do that and how long it would take to do that. And whether or not the political situation would even allow them to do that. So put Europe to the side for a bit. Ukraine is a U.S. proxy. And if Donald Trump needs to really enforce his will on Ukraine, he can walk. The Europeans are terrified of it. Ukrainians are terrified of it. But instead of doing that, he's decided to sign himself to a mineral deal with the thought that the weapons that they sell Zelensky can be effectively bought on credit in perpetuity. How on earth is that extricating yourself from a conflict? It seems like you've ensconced yourself more into a conflict as opposed to pulling yourself out of it. I hope you get my point. If you are saying we're giving you $50 million in weapons, okay, $50 million doesn't sound like a lot, right? Considering the amount of money that was given right off the bat. This seems like a tiny sum of money in regards to weaponry to sell. What is that? One weapons battery or whatever that is. Fair enough. But it's the principle of it, right? You've signed a deal that effectively allows them to potentially buy arms and weapons in a war that you claim you want to stop. And if the Russians keep going, then what? If you pass sanctions, do you believe that you passing sanctions is going to somehow incentivize them to deal with you? Now, Putin has said, I'm willing to speak to Zelensky. He needs to get rid of the thing that's in the Ukrainian constitution that they've added that disallows him to do it. But I'm willing to do so. But it's the Ukrainians that have taken the position that A, they put this thing in their constitution where they can't talk to the Russians. B, it is unclear whether or not they even recognize the territorial realities that are on the ground. If you listen to some of the things that are coming out of the people in Ukraine, some of the commanders, they are very defiant, believing that this is somehow going to turn around, that they're going to somehow beat back the Russians, despite the fact that they are lacking manpower and materials. Again, delusion is a beautiful place. Maybe what takes place is that over time, they get weaker and weaker and weaker. And when it gets to the point where the military is about to buckle, reality asserts itself. And as it asserts itself, they're willing to make a deal that is more realistic and that they're willing to talk to the Russians. Hell, you may even get a political gravity shift in Ukraine as a direct result of the military buckling in the first place. If you look at what is taking place on the ground right now, Chasiv Yar seems to be up for grabs. They seem to be aiming towards Kiev, potentially. Like, this is not a military situation that seems to be working out in Ukraine's best interest, especially after losing Kursk with Russia now in the Sumy region. I'm pointing out that whatever Trump thinks he is doing here by offering something that the Russians clearly was going to reject, which they did. Witkoff presented the deal. Putin flatly rejected the deal. I'm not accepting this nonsense that you're effectively putting out. Losers don't get to dictate terms, nor are we going to let you look as if you're at this higher status of a winner that is presenting something that we are going to accept. No. Flatly, no. That's where we are. It's a deadlock. Now, Kellogg has been going on TV saying, well, Ukraine accepts 22 points. Okay, I don't know that. Donald Trump is saying that he's talking to Xi Jinping on the phone. He's not. They've made the point of saying Russia is willing to freeze the conflict. They're not. So let's just be very clear. This is an administration that has zero issue lying and lying through their teeth. So until I hear the principals actually say that, until I hear Zelensky say, yes, we're willing to accept the Crimea as Russian territory. Yes, we're willing to accept these territories are, but then I don't believe it. Until I hear the Russian sources say that, then I'm not going to believe it coming out of the US media. They get it wrong. And oftentimes the sources are leaking stuff to them for the very purpose of putting it out in the media as propaganda and effectively lies. So that's the way I take that stuff, right? The reality of it is, there is no deal. The reality of it is, it's deadlocked, stagnant. Trump has made no progress on this. Whatever business deal you might be talking to the Russians about, okay, maybe they might be willing to have a business deal with you. That is secondary to the point of something that is existential from the standpoint of Russian security. If you can't get that this is an issue of security from the standpoint of the Russians, that they're not just willy-nilly rummaging through Ukraine because they want to take over all of Europe. Until you get that, that's not going to be a deal. I am very punitive towards the Ukraine thing because I feel like Zelensky has used this country as a battering ram in the interest of the West in a war that never needed to start and in a war that's gotten all of these people killed. So yes, I am brutal in the way that I think about this from the Ukrainian side. By the same token, these are human beings and the public didn't really sign up for this. Keep in mind, Zelensky was elected as a peace candidate. And as a peace candidate, he was like, we're going to, fulfill the Minsk agreements. We don't need to have this kind of conflict with the Russians. We can get along. We don't have to go after Russian language. And at some point, he fully internalized this role as an actor of him being a wartime president in an embattled country. It is an embattled country. He is a wartime president. But don't get it twisted. This was not a situation where you were just attacked willy-nilly. This notion of having NATO in Ukraine on the border of Russia was always a red line. And this idea that you were going to create this Hobbes choice of surrounding Russia with NATO, using Ukraine as a battering ram, was always a fail. We would have responded just as aggressively, and I would suspect we would have responded sooner than what Putin did, as opposed to letting this nonsense go on for 8 years, with them killing ethnic Russian Ukrainians. And the Cuban Missile Crisis, we were not going to tolerate it. We were willing to end the world for the U.S. national security. It is amazing to me that we forget that when we're looking at something like this, that we ourselves are effectively provoking. So Trump said he was going to end 24 hours. He should have said, this is Joe Biden's war. I want nothing to do with it. I am walking. Full stop. Right now, however, he has entangled himself in this conflict in a way where you can make a general case and say, look, dude, this has been yours for 100 and some days. You had the opportunity to walk. You didn't take the opportunity to walk. And instead, you passed more sanctions on Russia. You're giving $50 million. Yes, it's not a lot. But you've created a mechanism by which Ukraine, in my backyard, I'm sorry, a mechanism by which Ukraine can get more armaments, more weapons, potentially in perpetuity, under this notion that they will pay you back in some kind of business agreement that probably won't be exploited for the next 10, 20 years. It's weird, strange, but you did that. Joe Biden didn't do that. You did that. You had the opportunity to go, and you didn't take it. So it's a disappointment. I agree with Caleb on this. Okay. I bitched enough. They say he's coming on. Okay, great. All right. So he will be coming on. Thankfully. Good. I thought that was supposed to be 9 o'clock. Yes, all set. He will be on. Fair enough. Fair enough. I'll dance some more until he gets on. What time is it? It is, okay, so maybe it comes on at 9:30. Okay. Hopefully it comes on at 9:30. But I hope you guys get my point. Like, there were high hopes for Trump. I mean, as Caleb pointed out, he may be a better alternative than Kamala Harris because she might have ended the world in a war. But let's be very honest. There are severe vagaries that have, in this administration, severe failures. And the level of mendacity that comes out of Trump's mouth is breathtaking. An inability to acknowledge reality for what it is, regardless of the data that's presented to him. Hey, the economy sucks. No, the economy is really great. Hey, travel is down. No, travel is up. Hey, you're attacking Harvard. Black people love me. Black people love me. And in this case, you could have walked away from this war. Well, this is Joe Biden's war. This is not my war. It doesn't follow. It doesn't work. And the American public, in many respects, is seeing it for what it is. And the Republican Party that believes it's going to be able to walk, skate, not get hit by how bad he is, they're out of their minds. The midterms are a year away. That is true. But if these numbers don't change, and if it consistently stays this way, if we go into stagflation, which I suspect we will, and Professor Wolff will be the person to explain it to us. If the economy continues to suck, if prices continue to go up, manufacturing doesn't come back, which is not, who are they going to blame? Trump. And because Trump is so ubiquitous, because Trump is everywhere, meaning everywhere you look, it's Trump. Every story is about Trump. If you look on social media, Trump. If you look on regular media, Trump. He is everywhere. Meaning the Republican Party is not going to be defined by individuals. It's not going to be Mike Johnson. It's not going to be, rando Republican running. It is going to be Trump. It is going to be a referendum on Trump. And they are going to get hit by it. Now, Andrii said something that I didn't even think of, that many of the people in the deep state that don't want Trump to succeed in this, that want him to fail, are effectively waiting for the opportunity for Democrats to come back. And when those Democrats come back, to put a kibosh on anything that he plans going forward. And keep in mind, Democrats have been the most ardent supporters of Ukraine, wanting the war to continue and wanting the war to keep going. And so you have the House, you have the Senate, you have the Supreme Court, you have the presidency. Anything that you wanted to do now, you probably could do, considering all of them have effectively given fealty and allegiance to you. If you use the power to end this war, you have nobody to blame but yourself. If you end up attacking Iran because neocons around you are pushing you to be more hawkish, you have no one to blame but yourself. I want to bring in my man, the man of the hour, the man I really want to talk to, Professor Richard Wolff. I want to give your bio credit because you are fantastic. Professor Richard Wolff is Professor of Economics Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a visiting professor at the Graduate Program in International Affairs at the New School University in New York City. He is founder of Democracy at Work, fantastic program, by the way, and host of the nationally syndicated show Economic Update. His latest book, System is the Sickness When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. It is available with his other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info. Professor Wolff, you are the perfect person to talk to today. How are you doing? You doing okay?
Yes, I am. And let me start by thanking you. My head got twice as large by listening to very kind words you had to say.
You earned it. I've told you, there are very few people who've affected my workable point of view. You've been one of them. And what I mean by that is Jack Fresco, you said it, Venus Project, workable point of view. It's like, how do you see the world?
Right.
And how do you weigh the world and those things? And you've been one of those people that has affected it. So I do appreciate it. Economic information is in. And apparently, Donald Trump's trade war is not doing the economy all that well. So in the fourth quarter, there was 2.4% growth. They expected 0.4% growth, and they got negative 0.3% growth. Now, that is a 2.7% drop. I pointed out, my humble self, who is not an economist, a month ago, that we are headed towards stagflation, that the tariffs are going to increase prices, the depreciation of the dollar is going to make things more expensive, and we are headed for a recession. And by definition, that is a stagflation. Regardless of what Jerome Powell says, that is stagflation. And the reports that are coming out today are effectively saying the exact same word, stagflation. Why didn't it work? Why didn't Trump's theory of the case work? And what I mean by that is, I would give Trump credit for maybe diagnosing a problem correctly. And maybe you disagree with it, but he looks at it and just says, okay, hey, we need more business. We need more manufacturing. We need to bring that stuff back. People don't have jobs. They're not paying enough. But then he says, so we need a tariff war against the entire world in order to fix that. Why didn't his theory of the case pan out?
Okay, there's several levels of answer to that. It's a great question. It's the right question to ask. What you just summarized is as good as I can do about where we are. And so let me try to answer, but I'm saying first, it's at different levels. Here's one level. When people are wrapped up in an ideological project, it's not necessary, but it can often happen that they begin to get so wrapped up in that project that instead of looking at the world to see how it's working and how that connects to their project, they begin to look at the world through the lens of that project, and then they see things very weirdly. So let me explain. One of the ways to understand the American problem is to notice that over the last 10 or 15 years, we as a nation have gone into levels of debt we had never gone into before, not even in wartime. And when capitalist countries like ours go to war, there's always the anxiety of the people at the top, who are the ones who declare war or not, the Congress, the president, and the people around them. They're always worried, rightly, that they who make the decision are going to turn around, demand that the mass of people do the fighting in a war, and discover, to their chagrin, that the mass of people don't want to do that because it hurts when there's a bullet goes through you, and they don't want that. And they've noticed, like anybody with half a brain, that the people who make the decisions don't do the fighting, and vice versa. So there's an anxiety, and that plays out this way. They have learned, don't ever fight a war and then go to the mass of people and say, a war is very expensive, so we have to raise the money to fight a war, right? We have to take hundreds of thousands or millions of soldiers from the United States to wherever the war is. That's very expensive. Then we have to feed them and clothe them there. That's very expensive. And they keep shooting guns and planes and missiles, and those are very expensive. So how are you going to pay for this? Well, they could go to the people and say, I'll give you an example. We're about to fight a war in Ukraine, or we're about to fight a war in Gaza, because the United States, as you know, provides the weapons and the money for Israel to do what it is doing. It could go to the American people and say, I'm here to inform you, we are about to go to war against Russia in Ukraine and against the Palestinians in Gaza. And therefore, we have to raise taxes. And so you're going to have to pay an extra $3,412.82, your family, and the next door family, they pay their shit. You know what would happen? The war would be over before it began. Americans would say, wait a minute. So the way you pay for a war is by borrowing the money. The government borrows the money so it can avoid taxing people, because that's too dangerous. And that's been done over. The war in Vietnam was paid for by borrowing. The war in Iraq was paid. The war in Ukraine, the Israel, it's all borrowing. And so the American government has been running what are called budget deficits. It borrows the money to fight those wars. It borrows the money to give the Defense Department all the money it needs to have all the military bases around the world, and the missiles and the bombers and the fill in the blank, because the whole country would have a very different attitude towards the United States government if they had to pay the taxes for what that government does. So we're in debt, and we keep going into more and more debt. In recent years, the debt of the government has gone up by trillions, with a T, trillions of dollars per year. 2 Mondays ago, something happened that didn't get a lot of attention, but it should have. It turns out that when the United States government borrows, it doesn't care where the money comes from. It just needs to get the loan. It's kind of desperate. Some of us have been in that moment in our lives where we had to get a loan and we didn't care where it came from. So the American government borrows from rich people who have money to give it, corporations who have money to lend, and foreign corporations and foreign governments. The largest single creditor of the United States is Japan. Americans don't understand. The Japanese government lent that money to the United States. The Japanese banks lent money. And you know, which may surprise you, the number 2 foreign creditor after Japan is the People's Republic of China. If you want a shorthand way of understanding their position in the world versus America, China is the second biggest creditor of the United States, And the United States is the biggest debtor country in this planet. We borrow. That's now, when the Japanese two Mondays ago came to the meeting where they normally come to lend money to the U.S. Treasury, which has its agents there, the Japanese said, we're not willing to continue to lend to you. Why not? Said the U.S. Treasury agents. And the answer, which they knew, because you're so deeply in debt, you have become a risky borrower. What that means is our debt, which, in case you're wondering, is in the neighborhood of $36 trillion. Our annual output of goods and services is about $26 trillion. In other words, our debts have gotten into the 120% of our annual output. That's considered a dangerous level all over the world. So now you can get my response. Mr. Trump, he didn't cause all of this, but he's not innocent either. During the time of his first presidency, he ran deficits. The Republicans do, the Democrats do. That's the way our crazy politics works. The politicians don't want to tax corporations and the rich, fearing that if they do, those people will stop giving them the money that they need to run their campaigns. They're not going to tax corporations and the rich. But they can't tax the rest of us anymore either, because we're up to here. And if you hit us with more taxes, we'll never vote for you again. So they're stuck in our crazy system. They can't tax corporations and the rich, and they can't tax the rest of us because it's too politically dangerous. So what do? They borrow the money. Of course they do, because in that way, they can use the borrowed money to provide, a pension check to a Social Security grandma. They can pay for the next big missile. They can fight all the wars they want to, and they won't have to tax us. Does that sound crazy? Yes. Do we all live in that crazy? Yes. And we ought to face it. Now we're being forced to face it because Mr. Trump sits down with his advisors, and pretty much similar could have been done by a Democrat. I wish that weren't true, but it is. And you know it better than most. You see it all the time also. But in any case, Mr. Trump sat down and he came up with these two ideas. I have to come up with a way to stop borrowing as much as we do, because we're not going to find people to lend to us. And then where will we be? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this crazy businessman, Elon Musk, and I'm going to go tell him, go fire everybody you can find in the federal government, kick them out, close down their agency, stop spending any money. Number one. And number two, I'm going to come up with a way of getting more taxes, but I'm going to do it really clever. I'm going to call it a tariff, hoping people don't know that a tariff is a tax. And beyond that, I'm going to try to get foreigners to pay for it. That's as brilliant as his idea of getting Mexico to pay for the wall. That never happened either. This isn't going to happen either. The rest of the world is, if you allow me, showing us a middle finger, and that's going to come down the pike harder and harder. The United States is not in the position it was 50 years ago. We're not the ones who came out of World War II, the only powerful economy left standing in the rubble of the war. That was true back then, as not true now. We can't do what Mr. Trump is trying to do. It's not going to work. The rest of the world is not sitting there and folding its hand and asking what to do. Japan has been the closest ally you can imagine ever since World War II. And yet they told the Americans 2 weeks ago, We're not playing this game anymore. 3 days ago, there was an election in Canada, another one of our closest allies, and the people there voted a government that is also showing the same finger to Mr. Trump. Come on. If you're not blind, you see what's going on. And that's why we're going to have stagflation. We already do. We're having stagnation because every company, and this is really important, every company in the world is having to reorganize what it does, where it buys stuff in the world, where it sells stuff in the world, where it borrows money in the world. Why? Because trade with the United States is in chaos now. Nobody knows what they can sell here. It depends on how heavy a tax Mr. Trump puts on an electric car from China or a bottle of wine from France or a banana from Middle America. These are changing so fast, and the uncertainty, because Mr. Trump not only does this weird stuff, but he does it one day, undoes it the next day, redoes it the third day. You can't, so everybody's holding back. Everybody is saying, no, don't invest now. Don't expand that factory now. Don't hire that extra 20 guys. Don't do that now. It's too uncertain. And when lots of businesses hold back, that's when you get recession, depression, stagnation. And if you're doing it at the same time that you're raising the cost of everything coming into this country, yeah, then you're going to get an inflation. The way I explain it to people is, if you're like me, this morning you had a cup of coffee, and into the coffee you put some sugar. Well, I got news for you. Coffee is imported. Coffee has to pay a tariff. So does sugar. Welcome to America, where your morning latte is going to cost you half your week pay. You know, I'm exaggerating, but the point is, you understand. And if you want to know why would Trump do this if it's like the way I say, then this is the most important part of my answer. Because Mr. Trump's program should be understood as a program of desperation. This is not people quietly making an interesting plan for no. This is people throwing a Hail Mary pass down the field, hoping the right person grabs it out of the air. But there's no strategy here left. This is desperate. What are we going to do? If we can't borrow, we can't go to war. If we can't go to war, the American empire is over. I want to remind people, we lost the war in Vietnam. We lost the war in Afghanistan. We lost the war in Iraq, and we are losing the one in Ukraine. I mean, hello, pay some attention. Yeah. Those were wars that pitted the United States, one of the richest countries on earth, with probably the biggest military on earth, against some of the poorest countries on this planet. And we lost. You've got to understand, the whole world sees that. Americans may not think that's a problem, but everybody else goes, uh-oh, we better not rely on the United States, because that's a bad deal, and we're watching how that plays out. And look, I'm an American. I was born in this country. I've worked and lived here all my life. I feel very much an American. So I understand this is difficult. You know, for the previous 100 years, we were the empire going up, and it was a pretty good ride for an awful lot of people. We all remember, not all the people, not the African-American people, not the, they were left out. And that should never be forgotten. But for many, it was a nice ride up. Now the ride is going down. And you can see the people at the top, they don't want to give up anything that they got. So they're holding on. And that means the rest of us, we're going to have to pay the price of a declining empire. And that is no fun at all. What you're watching is Elon Musk destroy a huge range of public services that most Americans, one way or another, depend on. And that's a part of who's going to pay the cost of a declining empire. And in this system, It's the average middle and lower income people upon whom all of that burden is going to be put. And we're living through it. And the only question, really the only, and they know it in Washington, I can assure you. You know, I went to the same elite schools all those people did. I know them.
Yeah.
I know them. They know that the only ultimate question is, how much of this will the American working class, white, brown, and black, tolerate? How much will they accept? At what point will they say, no, 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 no more of this? You're not taking away my student loan. You're not taking away my Medicaid program. You're not. And when they say, oh, yes, we are, and the working people say, oh, no, you're not, you know what that's called? That's called a revolution. And you may think that only happened someplace else. We are on the road, man. Will we get there? I don't know. I don't predict the future any better than anybody else can. But you are doing things in this country that are putting people, as we can see, against each other. And you're making everybody sooner or later realize, which side are you on?
Professor, from your mouth to God's ears, it just seems like there's an ideological difference in America that is not in France, it's not in Germany, it's not in some of these places in Europe, that Social Security is a handout, that it's an entitlement. Student loans are things that, well, I had to pay them, so you should pay them. Meaning it doesn't seem like there's an ideological framing for it. In fact, the ideology seems to go in the opposite direction, where it's, well, if I don't get it, it's a handout from the government, as opposed to governments can arrange themselves and support their populations if they want to support their populations. It's like a ragged capitalistic country. I'll tell you, I was in I was in Cairo. I was at Kenya, actually, Nairobi, and I was at a casino, and I met this guy from Denmark, and he engages me in a conversation. He says, the way you guys do capitalism now, you screw over your workers. He says, we're a capitalistic country, but we pay our people, $20 an hour to work at McDonald's. Right. And he's like, we get buy-in from our workers. You guys don't. I don't understand how you do it that way. I met another guy from Germany, and I was getting healthcare abroad. And he says, how much are you paying for this? And he tells me, he says, my government pays for this. And, I'm sitting there like indignant, dude, I don't need to hear that. It's like these people are effectively telling me we arrange our governments in a way that tries to cover the working class in a way that in America you guys don't do, and not just don't do, don't push for, don't believe you deserve. Meaning, how does that, which side are you on, come into play if the American public doesn't even believe that government should function that way, should behave that way? I hope the question makes sense.
Absolutely. No, it absolutely makes sense. And your description is 100%. I've had those conversations myself. Let me remind you, my father was born in France. I speak French since I've been a kid. My parents were refugees. That's why I was born in America. I've lived here and worked here all my life. But I'm very, tied back into the European. My wife and I were once in France, and she got a pain in her tooth. And we went to a local dentist in a little village. And he took care of her. He worked about, I would say, a half an hour. And, she's in the dental chair lying back, and he's doing his thing. And then he fixed it. Very nice. No more pain. And it was real great. And so we go into his office, and he says, because he could hear it from my wife, who she speaks French, but not the way I do. She didn't grow up that way.
Yeah.
So he says, I can see that you're not French. But here he said, I'm part of the National Health Service. So when people come to see me, nobody pays me anything. I get a salary for being a dentist, and I maintain an office. And there are certain procedures that are more elective. And if you want that, then you have to pay me, and I do that. But most of my work is, taking care of people's normal dental work.
Yeah.
And he said, how he says to us in French, of course, he says, how much do you think you ought to pay me? So I start laughing and I answer him in French, well, how much do you normally get? And then he explains, well, I don't normally get because I'm on a salary. And then we giggle and he giggles and he says, how about this? Would $15 be okay? So I smile to him and I say, in the United States, for $15, he might let me use the ashtray in the waiting room. But he's not going to work on my teeth.
Right.
And he laughed and he said, yeah, I heard that. He said, $15 sounds to me okay. I gave the man $15. He sent us on our way. And my wife's tooth problems had been taken care of. It's just a different, as you put it, it's a different way of thinking.
Right.
When it comes to Social Security, I really got to tell you, it blows my mind because it tells you how bad the indoctrination here is. Social Security should never have been called an entitlement. You pay for that. Your whole life, money is withheld from your paycheck. You know that. I know that. I've seen it all my life. There's a little FICA, and it says on the check, they took out $182, whatever it was, each week to put into. So you're not giving me an entitlement. You're giving me back my money.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I accepted to have my wages reduced all my life to put that money aside so that when I get to be 65 or whatever it is, I have something to fall back on. But this is not an entitlement. You didn't ask me, am I happy to have money withheld from Social Security? My employer just took it because it was the law to do that. And I didn't say anything. None of my fellow workers did. So calling it an entitlement is already an ideological hustle. It's a way of suggesting you don't really deserve this. Yeah, it's just charity helping you. And now let me put it the other way. The single biggest outlay of cash, unusual cash, over the last 2 or 3 years has been the government giving enormous amounts of money to corporations. For example, that once it became clear that the Chinese are developing computer chips as fast or faster than we are, and that those are crucial for the future of our economies, the United States got upset. Oh, we're not number one anymore. Hello, you know, it's what we're talking about. So they decided to give a lot of money to corporations. Hello? What did the corporate? I mean, what? I thought we were living in a private enterprise. Either it's private or it isn't. If it's private, then it doesn't get government money.
Right.
And if you're going to give it government money, well, then what do the rest of us who provide the government with the money, what do we think about it? Either we live in a democracy where we have some say, or we don't. And I got news for you. We don't. So what? You know, you're holding it against the person who gets food stamps or who gets Medicaid. And meanwhile, you're giving vast amounts of money to people who don't need it. They're the corporations and the rich. They're the ones who need it least. And you're giving, whereas those who need it most, you're arguing about. This is upside down. This is Robin Hood in reverse. Instead of stealing from the rich to give to the poor, we live in a system that steals from the poor to give even more to the rich.
Last question. What could Trump have done when he got in? Meaning, as opposed to this fool's errand of, I'm going to roll back 50 years of globalization.
Here's what he could have done. Made America, stay with his slogan. Keep his red hat, MAGA, M-A-G-A, make America great again. Here's a way he could have gone. He could have admitted to the American people what those of us that are economists know, that the single most important economic act of his first presidency, the 8 years ago that he was president, was the activity, the act that was passed in December of 2017. It was one of the biggest tax cuts in American history. It was mostly for corporations and for the rich. You and I got a little bit so that we would think we were lucky. So we got $84.19 less taxes to pay, and we felt lucky. Meanwhile, the employer took his $80,000 saving, left all the way to the bank, stepped right over us as he entered the bank. Okay? That bill, because of the Democrats, did the Democrats fight that bill? Not much. Did they stop that bill? Not at all. Here's what the Democrats got. They got in the bill a provision that this law only applied for the next 8 years. It expires this year, 2025. So here's what Mr. Trump could have done. He could have stood up, and by the way, would he have become popular? You know what's happening to his popularity? It's going right into the circular bowl, you know? All right, here's what he could have done. He could have said, my fellow Americans, I gave the corporations and the rich a spectacular tax cut. Every one of the last 8 years, they have paid way less. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars less in taxes because of the bill I gave them. Okay, that's a big enough gift to give to corporations and the rich. So I'm going to let that bill expire at the end of 2025, which means corporations and the rich will have to resume paying what they once did. We're making America great again, the way it was back in 2017. That would have brought to the government a massive amount of money. From whom? From the corporations and the rich, who had just gotten an 8-year gift.
Right.
They couldn't have squawked. He would have seemed to be a hero, and he wouldn't have had to do the rest of the crazy stuff Elon Musk and he are doing, disrupting the whole world economy. That would have been, if I was his advisor, that's what I would have told him. And that'll give you a clue as to why it is I'm not his advisor.
Professor Wolff, I always appreciate you, man. Always. Just to give you bio, Professor Wolff.
I think you and I are beginning to develop the capacity that we want to go out on the trail and be a duet.
Look, you are always appreciated here. I always appreciate having you. I always appreciate these conversations. The audience loves you bits. Professor Economic Emeritus, University of Massachusetts Amherst, and visiting professor at the graduate program in International Affairs of New School University, New York City. He's founder of Democracy at Work, host of the nationally syndicated show Economic Update. Again, fantastic show. Definitely check it out. His latest book is System is the Sickness. Actually, you may have a later book. This might be old, but I'll read it anyway. System is the Sickness, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, and is available with his other books, Understanding Socialism and Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info. Professor. Oh, and by the way, where can people find you? They can find you on Twitter at Professor Wolff, Prof Wolff.
Yep, and YouTube, just go to democracyatwork.info. That's our website, and you can find everything there that we do.
Very cool. Thank you for this. You be safe, okay?
You too, and I hope to talk to you again in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye-bye. All right. Professor Wolff, he came. He's fantastic. Perfect day for him to come, especially with the economic news that we're having. I had to dance a little bit until he got here, but fair enough, he got here. So God bless. We've come to the end. We've come to the end. I want to thank Caleb. I want to thank Andrii. I want to thank Professor Wolff. I want to thank all of you for joining me for this show. What time is it? I think we made the entire show. Yes, we are even at. Yeah, we're even over. So I've given you 4 minutes more of the dancing for the day. I appreciate all of you guys joining me. We had a really good crowd. We were up to 516. We stayed around 4 something to bubble up towards the end when Professor Wolff was here. So shout out to all of you. And I will see you guys bright and early. What is it? Glad he made it. It still has, what is it? Ways of thinking, but also thinking critically. Have a great day. He's fantastic. What are you talking about? And he's right. The only difference is I would have preferred he said, okay, instead of giving the plutocrats a tax, I'm going to all of you, everybody else. That's the only other thing. So, all right. You guys have a phenomenal day. I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Jamal Thomas Morning Show. Penguin, what is that? Penguin Blue waving tear to Jamal. Why is Penguin Blue waving a tear? Joanna Jopley, Saf Stars, Rampelstein 01. I saw Jin Choi, Charles G. All of you. Have a fantastic day. Signing off. Bye-bye. And Wanda, I see Wanda, Cypher Agent. Have a good one, guys. Fei Lu.